And so it's probably harder for me to get comfortable in most situations. I don't know if that's attributed to it too, but it also the tolerance for anesthesia. You can't put me out very easily. So, I mean, there's probably different brains, and hypnotism is like a willing participant sort of thing.
And then you will get people like Tom. Tom, are you with us? Talking about how the energy body can actually affect our ability to go under anesthesia and maybe also be a factor in having conscious memories from abductions.
Yeah, yeah, I'm totally here. And yeah, I thought a lot about that subject. And I remember some scientists like Stuart Hameroff doing a lot of research into how anesthesia affects consciousness and what the actual biological mechanism behind that is. But just overall, personally, just in my view, I think it really has to do with the intensity of your consciousness and also how well developed your prefrontal cortex is, which has a lot to do with self control and self awareness. So it might be a combination of both the physical and the spiritual.
Yeah, I have a feeling Fringe's soul is ingrained with I do not consent.
I do not consent. Tiff, they are not listening to me, unfortunately, no matter how much I do not consent.
And that's going to be an important thing we're going to discuss today, I hope. I don't know if Reed or Marshall want to just jump in and start while we wait for Dr. B.
Yep. Hey, everyone. I'm not sure if now's the moment to talk at length. I guess I'll just introduce myself. Some may not quite know who I am. Yeah, I've been involved in this reality for my literal entire life since the day I was born, and we can unpack what that means as I have my father here on the call, and my family has been engaged in a pretty extraordinary set of life experiences and possible contacts, possibly even a message, just not just for Marshall or our family, but to help the broader community come to terms with what this visitation is that we're experiencing. So I've been in that for a long time now. I'm more recently really stepping out more to talk about the NHI and the NHIs in plural, and the agendas at play, kind of the nuances of the interaction that's undertaking, that they are undertaking with human beings, and what that means for us, especially as disclosure becomes an ever greater possibility. So here to talk about all that.
And I'm here to really present some extraordinary things that have been revealed to me and that I've been carrying for a very long time. I've been a student of this for 35 years. And I really come from the spiritual aspect. My greater community spirituality of the universe is really where my heart is. But the universe is a place of great hazard and opportunity, where all levels of consciousness exist, and certainly is beyond our notions of what logic is and what reality is to a certain degree. So I bring with it a real journey, and I hope I can make a contribution with you here today.
Tom, are you okay with giving a little intro while we wait for Dr. B?
Okay, so ultimately, what we're talking about is the NHI presence, the non human intelligence presence on Earth, and not so much whether it exists or not, but what its intention is for itself and for humanity, like how the two relate. Because ultimately, humanity, we have a spiritual trajectory. I don't know if you believe in destiny, but you could call it kind of destiny that is encoded not only into our genome, but also into the spiritual makeup of our being. The fact that we are the certain way that we are now sort of indicates where we've been and where we will be going. And the question is, do entities that are beyond that, like, non-human entities, are they in alignment with that destiny, or are they against it? Are they trying to misappropriate it? And so I think the Allies' work is one of several that I respect that really gets to the heart of this question. So everything that Reed, Marshall can say on this topic, and Dr. Brandenburg as well, I think will be really important for giving us a more transcendent or bigger context, versus the typical, do UFOs exist, and is disclosure coming anytime soon from different outlets in the government. So this deals with the more subtle nuances, as Reed says, which I think is a more daring step than the simple academic analysis of current data. So I think if we approach it more from a strategic, perhaps even tactical viewpoint, as well as a spiritual viewpoint, I think it fleshes out the bigger context of what we're really dealing with here.
Tom, and then could you just speak very briefly? I saw a post, and this started with Tupa, and then Ulrich picked up on it, and then it came to Reed, and then it came to you. And the whole idea is that ufology has a bravery problem. And it just seems like we are caught in this analysis paralysis. There's not enough data, there's not enough material, there's just not enough to come to any conclusions. And maybe the two of you could speak to that. Tom, if you want to go, and then, or actually, let's have Reed go, and then Tom, I think you responded to Reed, and I think this is something very important we could talk about before we get started.
Great. Would you like me to talk specifically about that bravery problem, or kind of back up and cover those points that Tom introduced?
I think go wherever you want to go with it.
Okay, good. We'll do. Yeah, so good to be with you all. I think I want to take up that challenge that Tom just mentioned of going a step beyond just that academic, what is happening into what does it mean? And even what do we need to do about it? Because I would assert that after 75 years of active study into the phenomenon, we have this modern wave of visitation taking place, and I believe it is quite distinct from ancient forms of contact that I do believe also have occurred. I think the reason they have come goes a long way in kind of suggesting the intent for which they're here. So like what is the context on Earth at this time in the last 100 years that has shifted concurrent with this entrance into our space by this non-human intelligence? So we can get into the modern versus ancient, but I'll just skip right past it. I'll say that we're in a modern visitation that is distinct from ancient forms of visitation. We've had 75 plus years to study it, and as we all queue up kind of at the breadline, waiting for handouts from, the deep state, defense establishment, intelligence community, at least in the United States, I think there's a different line to form, and that is a lineup to individually and collectively, if possible, come to a starting assessment of this visitation. And I would assert that we have all the evidence we need already, without any more, to come to a starting assessment, not a final conclusion, but literal starting point from which we can iterate and entertain new evidence, new whistleblower testimony, etc. But the fact that most of the UFO community remains kind of mired in possibilities and seems unwilling to land on more solid probabilities that are evidential, cautious, responsible, and logical, thus prohibiting the formation of a starting assessment, I think is a huge problem. And so my focus right now is helping people get to that starting line, because we're in a race. We are not interacting with a mechanistic phenomenon right here that can just be analyzed over on our own human timescales. This is sentience. This is hyper-intelligent sentience, and it is operating in our world in ways that we are not capable of monitoring and managing and even mitigating. And it has been doing so for decades. And so the longer we wait in this kind of cloud of confusion and do not come to greater levels of certainty iteratively based on both evidence but also our human logical process, I think we're putting ourselves in a position of considerable risk. Risk is growing year by year. And to the extent that this visitation represents a threat to human survival or human interests, the risk is compounded even greater. So I think we can come to a starting assessment of this visitation. A lot of my work is kind of thinking that through and helping people, for now, those who are aware of this, but post-disclosure, potentially many, many more people in their personal walk around of the phenomenon. And though I think, we all begin with opening up to greater possibilities, going from a closed worldview that does not accept alien visitation, for example, as possible, we open up the aperture. We also ultimately need to close the aperture down and focus and come and bring the picture into focus. And this is largely what's not happening. So that said, I'd like to make the assertion that I think the most cautious, responsible, logical, and evidential starting assessment of this visitation is that we are being discovered by other forms of physical intelligence who are here with an agenda and an intent that is almost certainly counter to our own. This is species to species contact with competitive forms of intelligent life. I think that is truthfully the best starting assessment of the phenomenon. It's not to say it's the final conclusion. It's also not to say that's all that's out there or that's all that will ever come here. I don't think that's true. But I think it is the best place to start. And so obviously we're going to get into if that's true. Let's take that on as a premise. What then might their agenda be? And there's so much we can bring in now with that assessment as indicative of that agenda. Obviously, let me just get going on that. This presence this NHI in our world, has been functioning with a high degree of secrecy and a very low degree of self-disclosure. So clearly they are opting to not be understood. And that is also a massive component as to why they are not understood. This is, again, not, we're not studying a mechanistic phenomenon. We're studying a phenomenon that perceives our study of it and responds to us intelligently, that knows how to cover its tracks technologically and even psychologically in ways that might baffle us. And so, this is kind of, you could call it cat and mouse, and we are not the cat. We are dealing with a vastly greater intelligence than our own, but not one that is incomprehensible to us. I think that's a very dangerous assumption to make, that we cannot possibly understand it using, our limited human anthropocentric views or our very kind of like 1.0 level consciousness. We absolutely must take on some sort of assessment in our own consciousness of what this force is and engage with it from there. So again, I believe we have this set of physical species in our human space, technologically advanced, psychologically advanced, employing a set of strategies and tactics in a bid to enact an agenda. Something brought them here, right? The motivation. And then once here, they formulated some sort of agenda to carry that out. And I think we can begin to consider what that agenda might be. I think, the Allies of Humanity briefings received by Marshall here are a very important set of corroborating documents that really add weight to the assessment that we can make on our own already, not relying on any sort of telepathically transmitted alien message. We have enough to do this on our own. And to the extent that we refuse to, I think we really weaken ourselves. It's kind of like we're casting a subtle vote, not in favor of our human capabilities. If after 75 years of observation and intelligent study of this by numerous people, we cannot even assess what is probable, that's a big problem. And so if this is a message of empowerment, let it be that first and foremost, that we absolutely have the logical capabilities, the tools, the techniques to assess this, and then move from there. So, I'm going to skip over a lot of what I might say about the different hypotheses regarding the being of the NHI, what they are, the origins of the NHI, where they're from, and the intent of the NHI. I'm sorry, I'm not going to skip over that last one. I'm going to actually skip to that last one, and because I think that's where the conversation wants to go.
Reed, quickly, would you
Yes.
mind actually backing up just a little bit before we get to the rest of that? We're talking about a starting assessment, but I know there are people in the room who would actually disagree with the start of your assessment. And I would love to have any background. I heard you mention things like secrecy. What is your background that comes prior to this starting assessment? What made you start there? What is the information you have that actually brought you to your starting assessment?
Yeah, sure. Let's definitely go there. And yeah, I did. I landed one data point, but not all the others. So secrecy is certainly one. I think there is absolute physicality to this phenomenon. These are objects or craft. Let's call it physical. There might be an extra dimensional component to that or a metaphysical component to that. The immediacy of it is that of a physical phenomenon in our physical earth environment, terrestrial atmosphere, hydrosphere, literally in the world. And, I think caution is important here because I think, there is vulnerability present in our world. We're a world of almost 8 billion divided humans, hundreds of countries, competing agendas, very different levels of technological and sociological development in the world. And so there are a lot of points of entry that cannot be monitored by us, the human species, and we have no, collective human voice in the universe to even voice our human priorities. And so the possibility, for the strategies of, we'll get there in a minute, but divide and conquer, are very easily enacted in our space. And so there's a lot of vulnerability in the world. And so the physicality of the phenomenon operating in our human space, undisclosed and with secrecy, I think for me lands me at a probable starting assessment that we are not dealing with something that is non-physical, that is inherently metaphysical, but something with physicality that poses risk. Now, whether it poses threat is kind of a later question. Risk can be inherent in an interaction no matter what the intent of both parties. And I see a lot of risk here. Our technological development is in a hockey stick right now, and it's almost out of our control when you consider AI, transgenics, human surveillance, things that are quite truly out of our control. Another force that has mastered such technologies or even surpassed them could so easily come in and introduce, in a Trojan horse kind of fashion, their own slight adjustments to our own developments that really alter the human outcome in some pretty high risk ways. So I think risk is there. I think there's also indication that these objects are intelligently controlled. They're not, I would say, I would go beyond objects. I would say that they are intelligently piloted craft of some kind, based on their movements, how they interact, with us, and for example, military pilots in altercations, in the airspace. So I think there is intelligence behind these physical phenomenon. And if I go kind of down my list here, I look to the human interface with NHI. And though a lot of hard evidence is missing that would be conclusive of this being true, I think it is the probable assessment to make that human beings are physically making contact with other physical beings. These are the accounts that have been shared over so many years by contactees and abductees. They corroborate one another among people who have obviously never met, from different cultures and societies, different levels of, technological involvement in the world. I was reading a contactee report on the CUFOS site last night, by a herder in Argentina who was taken aboard a craft by three hybrid individuals, and all sorts of things were done to him. And this is an individual who definitely did not have a cell phone in the year 1977 when this happened. Possibly had never made a phone call in his life. There was no internet. And so stories like that being corroborated across time and space, across our human space, are indicative that human beings are making some sort of physical contact with another physical being. If I go down the list even further, all these communications that people say that they've had with extraterrestrials, whether it's an in-person communication or a telepathically received communication, I don't know if we can take them all as gospel truth. We cannot. But one thing I note in these communications is that the beings very often say, we are physical creatures, aliens, beings from another star system. So, okay, if this phenomenon was angelic in nature, would angels lie about their angelic origins and being by saying they're aliens? Would that help the ontological shock? I don't think it would. I think it would hurt. I don't see a lot of reason for these entities to be lying when they say that they are other species from other star systems. If I may go down the list even further, we have growing eyewitness, whistleblower testimony of crashed vehicles that have pilots, possibly even biologics. So, all of this is not conclusive. It's not to say this shows without, any doubt what the phenomenon is. It's suggestive of a starting point to me. And you can contest that starting point. You can introduce all sorts of other data points that matter most to you, and that's fine. Ancient astronauts and the religious connection, that's okay. I would still ask, does an angelic explanation or does a crypto-terrestrial explanation constitute the most responsible and cautious one to take as a starting point? Does it lower our guard? Does it unite the human species in ways that we know are needed? Not to say that, the tail wags the dog and the outcome we want should dictate the hypothesis that we adopt at the outset, but the hypothesis that we adopt at the outset does predispose us to a certain journey. And if it's a hypothesis that pacifies us or makes us project our spiritual or religious beliefs onto the universe at large, hopefully in a hopeful fashion, I think that disables the critical capabilities we have in terms of logic and caution and other things. So I present 8 criteria, which I feel should constitute what gets us from possibility past probability to starting assessment. And I'll just read those to you. And this is this is the light box upon which I put the X-ray, that kind of lights up the data for me. And feel free to interrupt me if I'm going on too long here, but these 8 criteria. So evidence, we all would agree, evidence is super important to understand the phenomenon. I think the argument for hard evidence is increasingly a dangerous one in terms of how our evidence can be manufactured, manipulated, but also how our perception of evidence could potentially be manufactured or manipulated. Could we be made to see things that weren't there? Can we be prevented from seeing things that were there? So I think the hard evidence argument, which by the way works right into the hand of those who are the power brokers because they have all the hard evidence, they have the craft, they have whatever, whatever's been recovered. So this very public argument for hard evidence, understandable, but unfortunately, it is not a neutral argument, and it definitely shifts power in this equation. But I think we have a lot of eyewitness testimony. We have a lot of incidents of mass witnessing of a sighting. We have the contactee abductee phenomenon. We have the reality of human mutilation and implantation, animal mutilation. We have this preponderance of purported messages from space, and there is consistency among them, which is interesting to note, but there is also a tremendous consistency of logical fallacy among them. For example, humanity is such a lowly form of life that it needs to be imprisoned, monitored, managed like cattle, or that this is a zoo planet or something like that. Any visitor to our world who makes a message like that is inherently an act of gaslighting and an act of repositioning power and authority from native to foreign sources, super suspect. And the fact that it is in the preponderance of these messages, I also believe is suspect. And this is how I start to formulate an assessment about intent, because these start to look like the strategies of intervention, the strategies of how one intelligent nation, empire, civilization, tribe begins to move in on the environment and the resources of another. And of course, these are hyper-intelligent implementations of such strategies, but they do have a strong corollary to how we in this world, in our colonial history, for example, in the interaction between empire, have influenced one another, outbred one another, and supplanted one another. And you even see this beyond our human example in species-to-species interaction in nature. There have been billions of species on Earth, and only 1% of them are alive today. Why? Because via contact and through environmental pressure and also cataclysmic events, such as those that triggered the former mass extinctions, you see how species tend to interact within an environment to gain access to those resources, to perpetuate their species, and how that leads to either elevation or diminishment and ultimately extinction. And I think there are corollaries in that we need to be aware of. Again, none of this is to say this conclusively tells us what is happening. I think what it does is it is highly suggestive of the most logical and cautious place to begin. And I don't see folks identifying a starting point in their assessment and moving from there. Everyone, well, not everyone, but for so many years, and Marshall, you can jump in here because you were part of advocating such logic and such caution in the 2000s, 20 years ago. But even today, in some ways, we're wandering even more broadly and widely upon the hillside. And this is becoming even more of an adventure in consciousness. And our own human needs and aspirations and unrequited desire fulfillment is all being read upon what could be a physical visitation by competitive forms of life. And we are not getting our act together. We're definitely not seeing this for what it is. And the farther we push out this starting assessment, good luck making any conclusion. And if there's no conclusion or even a working conclusion, be it an adaptive one, we're pushing out, taking a position, proposing action, getting down to doing anything about this. And so, there are certain trends in the UFO community that I think they add to this kind of fracturing of what could be seen clearly and coherently into 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 shades of different interpretations. And the cloud of dust gets kicked up even harder. And this is the smokescreen. And Marshall can talk about this, but it appears there is activity underway by the NHI to kick up that smokescreen to make it very difficult to perceive their presence and their activity and the overall agenda that activity is suggestive of. And who would know? There's very few people even talking about that. I mean, the NHI is not the controversy. The government is the controversy. And sometime in the last 20 years, there was a huge shift from thinking about what they are doing to being upset about what we are doing. And I don't think that's accidental. And so again, we're operating in this inquiry, not studying a virus or a bacteria or something that just does what it does at a genetic coding level. Okay, yes, other life forms are influencing their behavior at the level of consciousness, I would say for sure. But this is 2 orders magnitude greater. And we're not interfacing well, I don't think, as a human species in this contact event. And we're definitely not moving through the possibilities to the probabilities, and we're not generating any sort of kind of consensus understanding that could lead to consensus action. So those are some of my concerns, and I'm happy to pause there if you want me to keep going or back up a little.
Yeah, thanks, Reed. I'm going to say something very briefly, and then I'd love to hear from Tom and Marshall on this, just this basic starting point that we have. So I personally do not think that the possibilities of origin that we spoke about, which is, crypto, interdimensional, etc., I don't think that that infringes whatsoever on your starting assessment. And I would also say that whether it is 100% physical or 100% consciousness or a little bit of both, that infringes on your starting assessment either. I know that there is a sensitivity to your starting assessment as to origin and to what this exactly is, but I think we can still leave those up to possibilities and still move on to probabilities. On your list. I would love to hear from all three of you. And I think us just having a conversation is totally fine. I don't think we need hands right now. If we could have Reed, Tom, and Marshall just kind of jumping in on this, that would be awesome.
Well, I think I can take it from here, if I may. Reed's assessment, I think, is very valuable because there's confusion of levels here. And confusion of levels is a very difficult thing when you're aware of different levels, which many self-aware people are, that life has different levels. There's the psychic, there's the spiritual, there's the physical, there's the metaphysical. These are all different levels, and some of them actually operate on different rules and principles. For instance, I do not confuse the physical with the spiritual very often. The spiritual can infuse itself on the physical and does, but they're operating on completely different platforms. One is temporary, the other is permanent. One is operating outside of time, the other is completely bound within time. And so I don't confuse these two levels because it makes both of them less accurate to do so. So I look at the intervention as a purely physical, historical, biological event first. Now, what it means at other levels, I do consider that. But I don't confuse the levels, because when you do that, you get a blur. Life becomes a blur. And now you're not being really practical, but you're also not being really incisive. So to stay out of that blur zone, for me, requires that I have this division of levels. And I think we need to focus on this as a species-to-species competition. They've been here for 75 years. They're not revealing their behavior, their activities, or their intent. They're taking people against their will, subjecting them to cruel and illegal processes, damaging them. I've been around many, many abductees through my work. Many of them come to work with me through the spiritual work. I'm not a therapist, so I don't regress them, but I see the damage being done here. They're really being used as resources. And of course, they try to think of it as a higher spiritual thing. It's redemptive. It's giving me new consciousness and all these things. But the fact of the matter is most of these people are very damaged. And they're also beset by living in a culture that doesn't recognize what they've been through or even accept it. So this confusion of levels thing, I think, is part of what muddies up the stream and approaching what really is an act of nature as much as anything, and is highly consequential and should not be confused with our hopeful and wishful thinking in any way. Okay. And I want to make one point that I know some people might disagree with, but has been an eye-opener for me. And the Allies briefings actually don't speak about this directly, but it is certainly inferred in what they're communicating. But it was on my own realization that the intervention is not here for us. It's here for the world. We're just part of the resource of the world. Now, they can't live here because of atmospheric and biological hazard. So they need us to work for them. And in order for that to be possible, they need to begin a hybridization program that's now many generations old to create for the future a new leadership for humanity that's bound to them, looks like us and can function here. Hybrids, not just people who have had contact, but people who actually been re-engineered intellectually and emotionally through a process of hybridization. So it's very clever. It's not what we would think, right? We think of Star Wars. That's our
I just
template.
did.
That's our template for life in the universe right there. I should continue. Complete some thoughts here that I think are important and have given me an opportunity to both really acknowledge our spiritual nature. And many of the people here, perhaps all of you, I would consider to be greater community people, or people who were born with a history in the universe or a deep feeling or sense of it or sense of destiny or purpose in your life that is connected to it in some way, however that may be. I certainly feel that way about myself. But I think, we're the native peoples of the New World. If we look at the history of what happened to native peoples of visitation from technically advanced other human nations, we know the outcome of that. And while this may be different, we should never forget that that is a template and should probably be our starting point, because history repeats itself. And, in my view, the first visitors en masse, in a sense of being highly impactful, are going to be resource explorers, economic collectives, the outreach of greater nations that would not interfere with us directly for reasons I can discuss later, but are here to do the exploratory kind of of dirty work for them. And I think this is really important for us to think about, because the only way that humanity is going to grow up and stop being adolescent and being fighting with each other constantly is to be challenged in this way. Otherwise, we're all trying to seek fulfillment from contact, which is ridiculous. And we're being challenged. And the challenge is what's going to uplift humanity, not fulfillment and belief and ideology. And we're star people now, and we're all going to celebrate, the star people of the universe and things like this. I'm telling you, people, if we don't get our act together, we're going to be mowed under. Not immediately, because they're playing the long game. We don't play the long game. They're playing the long game. They know from an atmospheric signature that we are going to change our climate, and that will probably reduce the human population by a phenomenal degree and create a cascading set of events. That plus the overuse of resources in this world and all the other environmental hazards and degradation that we have created on our own, neglectfully or willfully. So we're creating the condition that's going to make their ascendancy possible through all these things. So listen, what has nature and history taught us about Native people's contact with life from beyond its own shores? So let us always remember that as a lesson of life, not just a unique part of our history. It could be a part of the history of life in the universe. We are living on a planet highly valued by others, and we're slowly destroying it. Also, think about this. We've been broadcasting out in the universe all of our degradation, our wars, the changes we're making to our world, our human suffering, everything for the discrete observer to watch and discern, so that after 100 years, well, they probably know more about our psychology than we do. They understand what we do and why we do it. We understand our flaws, our weaknesses, our tendencies. And so they can capitalize all these things to serve a hidden agenda, hidden from us. So, you're not a visitor if you've been here for 75 years, undisclosed, unrevealing. That's not a visitor, people. That's an intruder. And they're not only just visiting, they are permanently here. They're planting themselves with an agenda. And so this is a come to Jesus time. I don't mean that literally, but this is a time to get really real about being challenged as humanity, as all being challenged equally by the same exterior forces who are here to do what they think is probably the appropriate thing to do. If the human beings can't manage the planet, well, we'll have to manage it, and they can work for us until we don't need them anymore. So, which is kind of I'm extrapolating this, but it kind of represents their behavior, the thinking behind their behaviors. We don't matter except that we're useful to them, and maybe not even permanently. So we have to get off our high spiritual horse. We have to get off our sense of we're so important in the universe that anyone would come here to help us and enable us and teach us to live in peace, because we're such an important race that we have to be helped to become who we really are. We are not important in the universe. I think we're important to God. I think we're important to the angelic presence. It values us because we still have freedom and spirituality alive in our own world, where it's died out in probably most big technological societies, or we never existed to begin with. So here we are, the native peoples of the world, walking around in circles about who's in our world. And when you begin to put together the clues of their behavior or lack of communication, you're seeing they're planting the seeds for conquest. It's interesting when you talk to people in the Middle East, and my son and I have traveled in the Middle East quite a bit. You talk to people who have been colonized in colonized countries. When you ask them about something like this, you'll hear people say something like, "Oh, we're here to take over." Because that's what happens when you have more powerful technological societies now intervening in less technological societies from our own history. So in their mindset, that's just would be the most logical thing to happen. For us, it's everything but that. It's everything. It has to be about us. It has to be about our fulfillment. It has to be about our evolution. But I'm telling you, people, they're here for the world. We're only useful to them. We don't matter beyond that. If you can put your arms around that, and for some people, that's like their hair on fire, right? Just they go around with their hair on fire. And I know this is a huge challenge to how we want to see this and how we thought we could see it or should see it. But I think it empowers us as the native peoples of the world, because though they may rule the skies this moment, they don't rule the ground. And they can't win us over by force, because it's not allowed in this part of our universe. Something nobody on Earth knows about, but which the Allies of Humanity briefings reveals to us. That conquest is not allowed in this arena of life in the universe, because we live in the midst of huge trading networks that have, after millennia of conflict and degradation and failure, have put together these vast networks to create stability and survivability for large numbers of planets. And we just happen to be the independent planet in amongst all of these. But those races who want to see our world under their sphere of influence cannot take us by conquest. They have to win us over by guile and deception. They have to at least make us look like we're not resisting them. See what I mean? That's the rules of intervention in our part of the universe. And I know you can say I don't believe that. Sure, you don't have to believe that. But it is part of the Allies' briefings. And what it does is it makes sense out of the behavior of the intervention today, which is non-military, which is not using force, which is employing its influence of persuasion, discouragement, guile, everything to hopeful, believing human beings who want to be rescued because we're in such ever increasing dilemmas on Earth. So I want to present this very prosaic position, even though I'm a very spiritual person. And I each teach about greater community spirituality, which is not what I'm talking about here today. I'm talking about greater community survivability, which you have to survive the greater community before you can begin to evolve within it spiritually. And our challenge is surviving the greater community as we stand today. So I'll turn the mic over from here.
Marshall, may I jump in real quick? Kind of as I proposed this starting assessment of species to species contact with competitive intelligence, you took it beautifully from there, I think. But I think one thing that would be good for you to talk about is what are these species, according to what you've received from this off-planet group of observers who call themselves the Allies of Humanity, without understanding the environment that our world actually presently exists within, it is difficult to assess the nature of any visitor. We can assess certain variables about them, their morphology, their craft, shape, size, what they tend to do in our human space or what they seem to tend to do. But to get a full understanding of what they are, how many of them there are, and what type of force they are, like what do they reflect from their environment? And so I think this is the collectives, if you'd like to just briefly talk about, from your perspective, who is actually in the world right now.
Okay, I'll do that succinctly. This is based upon my angelic work over many decades, and of course, the Allies Humanity briefings, which only occurred on 4 separate occasions with no contact in between. So I'm not hanging out with these folks. And these were given to me as a gift to humanity, not to replace our intelligence, but to amplify it and to fill in the spaces and gaps that do exist because we're all earthbound and we do not know what life is like beyond our border, however much we may hope and believe and speculate about it. So who's here? These are basically resource explorers. The collectives represent multiple races, are hierarchically organized to serve in different functions and capacities, which is why you see different archetypes in extraterrestrials as people report from direct encounters and observations and elsewhere. So they're here to map out the Earth for those who sent them here to do so. And they view us, they understand our basic mentality, but who we are spiritually may be a mystery to them. They seem to have no spiritual dimension at all. The people who report their conversations and interactions with them, they seem cold, they seem remote, they seem unimpressed by anything we say or do. This is the abductee contact from their actual on the craft, which there have been many, many reports very similar to each other from all over the place, many different nations. And I have readers now in 92 countries, so I'm getting feedback from lots of different places on these kinds of subjects. So collectives are hired by large empire-type nations to go explore planets for their potential, not only for resources, but for potential for colonization. We are a colonization prospect. Okay. And I'm taking it all the way with you people because, Reed is correcting a logos approach to this, but I'm kind of coming from the other angle of coming from this kind of position. And it's not what we want, hope, or believe, but it's the one thing that can unite a struggling humanity. We're not going to unite over diminishing resources. That could put us into ever greater conflict. We're not going to unite over religion and spirituality because we go in all directions as far as that goes. The one thing that can unite humanity is a threat to all of us equally, a threat to our freedom and to ultimately our existence here. And that's the most thing that most people do not want to hear. Is the thing they most would need to hear, because if we don't get that, then we're going in circles. We're beating around the bush while the alien agenda is carrying out its long range plans here, winning over whole generations of people establishing influence over individuals in positions of power in government, religion, and commerce, establishing its physical presence, mostly in oceans currently, and beginning to change the spiritual landscape of how we understand spirituality and to create a sense of their spirituality. I don't even know if they have a spirituality, but it's spirituality that's in alignment with them. They are now the new saviors of humanity, come to save us from ourselves. This is their narrative to the people they take. It's the narrative. And how do I know this? Because I've spoken at many UFO conferences where I'm the only dissenting member of the speakers. Everyone else is a pro-intervention. It's almost like an enrollment process for people to get with the intervention and believe in them, even though they're not doing anything for anybody. And so, I'm the dissenting voice. I'm the voice of, wait a minute, people, hold up. This, you just don't get on board and believe in a force that's not really doing anything, revealing anything. I mean, if they're really here to help us, they could have cured AIDS, they could have prevented the pandemic. They're not doing anything except maybe keeping some of their abductees alive. But, that's not good enough, people. I'm sorry. There's nothing about this that bespeaks friendship or positivity in any realm, in my view, because I look at them from a practical standpoint. Now, from a spiritual standpoint, there are higher powers in the universe, definitely. But they don't go around investing themselves in other worlds for the purpose of either trying to change the world or take it over. The spiritually advanced in the universe are more monastic, more hidden. They don't operate in large networks of trade and commerce. They're not the ones who are going to come to our Earth presenting us with hope and belief and possibility. Meanwhile, while they're undermining the foundation of our own societies and cultures, turning people against our own governments. This is a divide and conquer strategy, people. It's been around forever. So, I mean, we just have to really be careful and look at this thing from all angles. And I don't expect you to believe what I'm telling you, but to consider it as the wisest approach. If you neglect this, then we're just giving ourselves over, or we refuse to resist. And it's making the work of the intervention ever so much easier. So I'll turn this over again to whoever comes next.
Hey, Marshall, thank you so much. Reed, I'll let you respond, and then I want to let Dr. Brandenburg finally introduce himself.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. Just a couple things, Marshall. You kind of brought up the old adage for me: better safe than sorry. You could say, oh, that's way too basic or human centric to think in this setting, but I think safety is an issue here. I think there's a lot of indication that the contact occurring is not safe. Okay, people are being taken against their will. Crimes, according to any human court of law, are being committed, including aggravated assault, rape, murder, certainly abduction and disappearance. So, I mean, if that's happening, better safe than sorry, I would say for sure. So I just wanted to make that point. I also want to kind of voice the response that some might be having to this idea of colonization, of some sort of aggressive intent to kind of prospect our world and undertake some deep dark agenda. There is a lot of behavior that denotes that intent, I believe. But people might ask, well, if they wanted to do that, they would have done it already. They would have done it early in the game. If they wanted to either attack us, supplant us, eliminate us, they have not done that. They have not demonstrated overt aggression on a mass scale. And so therefore, and this is the big and therefore I hear all the time, I think there's a lot of logical fallacy in that argument. It's very possible that this force, given it being potentially small in size, having numerically much the disadvantage, not being local and having a base of operations early on the ground, but being far from their supply lines, you could say, would engage in a much deeper, longer form of incursion and alteration, and you could say conflict or aggression. And I think we need to start to think like that. Like you mentioned, Marshall, this is not a Star Wars scenario. This is not, hit the other on the head and take what they have. This is some sort of programmatic involvement in our world that possibly is a script that was written long ago. It's been played out maybe other times in other places. It's been refined, and it is engaging with us in a very specific set of ways that are consistent across human history and the human social space, country to country. And so just to consider that, they may want the world, they just may not destroy us and take it. They may just be engaging in a whole other set of nuanced strategies that are so deep, long term, that they're very difficult on any single human being's timescale of survival in terms of their own self-interest to ever perceive. And I think that makes a lot of sense. If I were them, that's what I would do. I wouldn't be overt and land on the White House lawn, or arouse all sorts of alarm and concern and interest, and then have to manage that. Rather, study us extensively, collect our human data set, run that through the algorithms, build the AI machine to enact a program that messages us according to our psychology, take people, create the substrate of biology that from which you can grow some sort of other life form or adjusted life form, create the worker you need, don't just educate the worker you need, and do so in a fashion that is so deep and long term, it's almost impossible to discern, especially given our own human tendencies toward ridicule of the unknown and everything else we've got going on the earth. So, no, they're not attacking us overtly. It could be another strategy, process of prospecting, of gaining access to worlds and their resources and using the local
Losing you here, Reedy.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear
Yeah,
you.
All right, wonderful. Reed, if you can hear us, we'll have you back up. That's
I
quick.
think I am back. I think I had a mic issue. The mic stole my speaker, so I'm
Yep,
back.
it
Yeah.
happens if you lose signal, get a phone call, anything. This app is a wonderful asset to disclosure, I think, in my opinion, because we can have these large panel conversations with as much of an audience as we'd like, but the glitches are just out of hand.
Reed, is it okay for me to hand it over to Dr. B?
Yes, please.
Wonderful. And so the conversation is once we let it go, we have some very interesting panelists here. Science Bob, I would love for you to request a mic. The invites I send you, they don't always push through. Same thing for Eric Mitchell. If you're up for it, I would love to have you up here, be part of the panel. You guys, I want our speakers, our featured guests, Dr. Brandenburg, Reed, and Marshall Summers, I want them to be completely unpressured. Dr. B, I want you to be a renegade. Like, take this conversation wherever you want to take it. Literally, we can talk about anything, and I'd like for the panelists to sort of jump in when they want. That's kind of what I want. So, Dr. B, go ahead and introduce yourself. And yeah, and from everybody, thank you and welcome.
first of all, I'll just say I'm deeply honored and pleased to be invited to be part of this forum, and particularly to share the stage with people like Marshall and Reed of Allies of Humanity, who actually have collaborated with me before, many years before. I will explain a little bit of that briefly, how that happened. But I will just simply list the things where allies and I agree completely. First, I'm just an Episcopalian. It's considered Christianity in its mildest form. But I believe in God, and I believe He's with us. And so are friendly ETs. I truly believe that. There's a lot of good out there. We know there's bad. It's like the earth. In fact, I say the Earth and humanity are not an aberration on the cosmos, we are a reflection of its nature. So, the second is that Earth appears to be located strategically and is, of course, resource rich. You come into this solar system, you spot Earth immediately as a water-rich, beautiful planet, and that means full of life. You could see the oxygen in the atmosphere, a dense atmosphere. So now we are threatened by a hostile covert takeover of this planet by some ETs. As I said in one posting on X, it's a nice planet you have there, And so this effort can be stopped, by the way. I agree with Marshall and Reed that there are constraints on the behavior of extraterrestrial beings around us that work against any overt violence here. It could trigger an interstellar war, and no one wants that. This is a strategic reason. I liken this place to Luxembourg in Europe that bordered on Belgium, Germany, France, and Belgium was connected at the hip with England, so that anything that happened to Luxembourg was a concern of a bunch of other countries, and so no country could go in and take Luxembourg. So as a result, it survived all of these wars and rumors of wars, and I believe the Earth will be very similar. I will also say I am very big into historical analogies, and also I'm a physicist, a plasma physicist. I work on on hot gases that conduct electricity like and glow. The star stuff, aurora borealis. I've been working in national defense and energy for the past 40 years, especially space defense. I worked in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. I heard everything that Gorish. I worked from 85 to just after 9/11 in Washington, D.C. And I was working with the Pentagon and the agencies on space technology and defense. I heard everything that Gorish and other people are testifying to. And, in offices that were classified from people I absolutely trusted as professionals. So, with all of that said, I will just say that the major scientific projects of my life are, first of all, ensuring human survival. I believe that's one of the tasks in life I was appointed to help with. I've been working on unified field theory to unify gravity in E&M. This is the Einstein problem. And as a result, what comes out is the basic flying saucer kind of shape or triangle. And it's called the GEM theory, gravity, E&M, or grandis et medianus, meaning the unification of the great with the middle scales of the cosmos. And as a practical justification for this, it tells us how the flying saucers and triangles fly, how they can be detected, and if necessary, how they can be brought down. So I'm now working on a book which has a working title, New Awakening, where I'm summarizing the things that we are discussing here in this forum. I'm also undertaking a movie project due to the collaboration of allies of humanity and their encouragement. I was able to write a large science fiction novel called Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up, to women who are, news journalists, television news journalists, bring down the UFO cover-up at great risk to their sanity and their lives finally, but they succeed. And I'm also now focused on, as we all are, encouraging the people, showing them there is hope. We have rational basis for hope that we will get through this, this is a traumatic process of finding out that we are not alone in the universe and we're no longer the top of the pyramid that we thought we were, at least viewed cosmically. But we're going to get through this with God's help and the help of friendly powers in the heavens. And our future will end up looking something like Star Trek. I'm assuming you people view Star Trek as a positive image of the future. So let's see. I just moved here to Oregon, where I grew up, Medford, Oregon. It's right on Interstate 5, just north of the California border. And I moved there because I was working for a company in Texas, an aerospace contractor, and they undertook to try and take they were very open to these ideas that we're discussing, by the way, and especially my Mars work, which I'll explain in a little bit of detail. I don't want to belabor any one point, but because of the GEM theory gives descriptions for how to build technology for gravity modification. And we've actually tested this in the lab and seen that it works. It just making small weight changes in objects when we turn on the power and then we turn off the power and they regain their weight. So my bosses unfortunately decided they wanted to patent all of this, and I said, bosses, you guys, I don't think that's a good idea. The government owns these patents on this stuff already, and especially the big aerospace giants, and they're classified patents. It doesn't matter; they're still patents, just like there's patents on the details of the design of the hydrogen bomb. So I said, this is a bad idea, but they just gave me this look like, John, go back to your office and do physics. Leave the high finance and managerial decisions to us. And so I did. And then I got an angry phone call from one of the people I worked with back in DC, complaining about my boss's activities. And then shortly thereafter, the company got torpedoed financially. Hence, our paycheck stopped. Basically, I'd never been through a situation. Well, I'd been in a situation of shrinking paychecks from companies, but never stopping completely like this. So after a long struggle of them trying to recover from this, I finally had to just resign and move back here to Oregon, where I could be close to family. And so there's my situation in a thumbnail. Right now, we are pursuing a movie project to turn Morningstar Pass, The Collapse collapse of the UFO cover up into a movie. And the movie, I believe, people will go into the theater and come out, as one person put it, having completely lost their virginity as far as the cosmos is concerned. And it stars two beautiful women, one of whom is Asian and one of whom is a blonde bombshell, typical kind of newscasters. And anyway, I'm temporarily just in the independent consulting mode up here in DC, having exhausted most of my cash reserves, waiting for my company to recover from taking 3 torpedoes to the port side. Now, I want to also summarize my major role in this was that I was very interested in UFOs when I was a kid, but the first animal mutilation, Snippy the horse, I believe she was called, happened. And I was so terrified by this and thought people from outer space would never do anything like that. And then the government came out with their, the Condon report, which basically said, move along here, folks. There's nothing here to see. And I was like in my early teens when all of this happened. And I just said, okay, the government says there's not a problem with this, so we're just not going to worry about it. And then, of course, I became part of the government education system. I got my PhD at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, Nuclear Weapons Lab. We worked on peaceful fusion energy on one end of the lab. That's where I worked. And they worked on hydrogen bombs on the other end of the lab. And when you're in that environment, if you're as one person put it, he says, if your thesis advisor tells you the world is flat and to stay away from the edges, that's what you do. You say, yes, sir. Please sign my thesis so I can get my doctoral thesis so I can get out of here and get a real job, and my wife a nice house, And that basically, so we were actually told when we were students there that if anyone asks you if warp drive is possible, meaning people can come from other star systems, you're to say absolutely not. It's against the law of relativity. And we actually sat around drinking coffee and eating donuts after one of these lectures where we were told to say this to people. Why are they telling us this? And but I then went to work at Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico, another nuclear weapons lab. I was working on directed energy weapons because all the money for fusion energy dried up mysteriously right before and shortly thereafter, the price of oil dropped to $10 a barrel. These were not unconnected events, I heard. One was it was a quid pro quo arrangement with the Middle East. But anyway, we went through a very bad nuclear war scare at the lab. It was called Able Archer in 1983, and we were as close to nuclear war as we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but nobody knew it in the public. But we, in the classified realm, were aware of it, and it came out right after Carl Sagan's nuclear winter, and the morale at the lab collapsed. People would tell me, oh, I used to think if there's going to be a nuclear war, I'd race home, get my wife and kids, and we'd go hide out in the hills and ride it out. And because of the nuclear winter, now they knew that more people would die of starvation and cold after the initial nuclear war than would die during the first couple of weeks from fallout and blast. And so I was kind of in despair and considered just absolutely just quitting and going and teaching someplace at some university, just ordinary physics. And then I saw this a new little news Saturday evening news special on the face on Mars, and it gave me hope. I thought, oh my God, if they've discovered a dead civilization on Mars, then the United States and Russia would have to make peace and go up there and explore it together. And for the first time in years, I actually had hope for the future that we would avoid a nuclear war and not destroy each other, at least even by accident. So anyway, I became involved in the Mars work, and we found, yes, there was a dead civilization on Mars. We also then found out, because I was working in a nuclear weapons lab, somebody inadvertently let slip, oh, the Martian atmosphere is full of nuclear weapons signature. So I investigated that, found out it was true. By that time, I was in Washington, D.C. at a different job. And I basically then reported this. We knew at this point that we were under surveillance because of our Mars work. They didn't tell us to stop investigating, however, was interestingly enough. They just wanted to know what we were doing. And so then from this, I found out one of the people my associate worked with at NASA was a government agent. who was apparently from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon CIA. So I reported to him that we had found evidence for not only a dead civilization, but a thermonuclear holocaust on Mars. And he came over and I gave him a standard 45-minute briefing summarizing the data that I had found in the open literature. And I said, what do I do? What should I do with this? I don't know whether to publish it or just sit on it. And he said, we'll get back to you. And I thought, oh, brother, I won't hear anything more about it. And no, but 6 weeks later, I got a message back in channels saying, why don't you publish this? We see no reason why it should not be published. They encouraged me to publish it. And so I did. And finally, I got it published in a major journal in Europe. The journal touched it. But the European journal did, and it got me a lot of very positive response. People thought the data that I'd assembled was quite formidable. And you can see that on like YouTube. I delivered lectures that are recorded on YouTube, like at the Mars Society recently. So basically, we have a completely different line of evidence that we live in an intelligent universe with other intelligences. And also we know not only is there intelligence elsewhere in the universe, there's utter brutality elsewhere in the universe also. Now, what happened on Mars apparently happened hundreds of millions of years ago before the dinosaurs on Earth. However, the faces look very humanoid that are depicted in these carvings. We found two faces that look very similar to each other. One's at a place, the Cydonia Mensa face, everyone's seen that. And then there's also a place called Galaxis Chaos, and you can see that in various articles I have written on this, especially Sidonian hypothesis re-examined. So, and I'm sorry if I'm going on and on. I just want to make comments, where Marshall Summers has said, we need a starting assessment. I use the terminology, a situation estimate that's from military intelligence, where you don't have a body of certified facts. All you have are reports, you have some data that's considered reliable, but then you actually have a bunch of reports, some of which are fragmentary due to the fog of war and the fact that subtle adversaries in situations always use deception. The Russians call this maskarova. And the situation estimate is, yes, that we have a group of hostile aliens from other stars has arrived here and appears to be attempting a hostile takeover of the Earth. I published an article on the X that I wrote in 1990, by the way, and it basically said, why would you make hybrids? Basically, you're transplanting the human immune system into a group of hybrid kind of worker bees to replace the human race, basically, so that they will be able to claim this planet for their own gen spore and eradicate us. We're too dangerous to keep around. So you'd say, well, if they're that hostile, why don't they just attack this place? Well, we're like Luxembourg. You can't just attack. I mean, somebody asked me, why is that plausible? And I said, that if they're that hostile, why don't they attack? And I said, well, we don't like North Korea and they don't like us, but because of the situation, we don't have a war. Instead, we're constantly waging psychological ploys against each other. This leaves us to what's called the Sun Tzu way of victory, which is to win a victory without any fighting at all. That's the best way to win a war, says Sun Tzu. So basically, I think these people are attempting a Sun Tzu type of victory here. And I have what I think is a very good historical analogy. Okay, so you have Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu said two interesting things about conflict. He said the best way to win a war is without any fighting whatsoever. Use a lot of psychological razzle dazzle and get the other army to desert or come over to your side, etc., etc. Attack their will to resist, and they won't resist. So that's Sun Tzu. He also said something else interesting that I'm going to remind you of just a little bit in a moment. Sun Tzu said that while he had heard of military campaigns that were clumsy, while he had heard of successful military campaigns that were clumsy but swift, he had never heard of a military campaign that lasted a long time and was successful. So we have to give the government some credit. This thing has dragged on now for 80 years. Now, for instance, the Greys, there seem to be three basic groups operating here. There's the reptilians. We don't hear much about them, but then we hear they're kind of repto-avians. Then there's of course the Greys. Apparently it's reported they have copper-based blood. That's why they're gray, not pink, like we are. And then there are of course the Pleiadians or Lyrians, and they were forced apparently out of Lyra to their present home near Orion. And the reports are that they're overwhelmingly friendly to us, but there are some of them who are not. I mean, most of the conflict on Earth is with other human beings, so it's not surprising that some human type aliens out there would not get along with us or like us. Anyway, so the historical analogy that I think applies here is a little known chapter of Spanish history. The Spanish are a good example of what it was like to have very aggressive exploiters and resource hunters roving around the earth. They conquered, of course, Mexico and Latin America, but especially Mexico, old Mexico. They destroyed the Aztec Empire. It took them 2 years to do it, but they did it. They then say that they crossed the Mexico and towards the Pacific coast, and they had shipbuilders. They actually cut down trees, built ships, and sailed across the Pacific. The same guys who were the conquistadors under Cortez, the same guys then sailed all the way across the Pacific to the Philippines, which they'd learned about from Magellan. They landed there and proceeded to conquer the Philippines. And the Philippines had a bunch of basically Stone Age tribesmen. And so the Spanish felt that it was a lot of trouble and there wasn't a lot of gold there and, riches and things like this. But they heard rumors of this beautiful place to the north with all these lovely women wearing these very nice silk gowns, and the streets were paved with gold, and it was a rich country and ripe for the picking. So they loaded up their ships and sailed north to Japan and tried to land in Japan and claim, it for the Pope and the King of Spain. And waiting for them on the beach, however, was the samurai, who had steel. They had horses. They had very good trained archers, and they were ferocious fighters, and having repelled the Mongols. And so but there was something else that the samurai had that really caused the Spanish to be deterred from trying to take Japan by force. That was that the samurai had gunpowder from the wicked Portuguese. The Spanish and the Portuguese were rivals in those days. Portuguese had gone there first and had traded to the Japanese muskets and gunpowder. They showed them how to make gunpowder and muskets. And so Japan at the time was a very disunited country. It was a bunch of samurai warlords, each with their own army, but they all had battalions of musketeers at that point. And the Spanish realized, even though the Japanese did not have cannons and Japanese knowledge of the world was, they thought the world was flat, basically. China's over here and we're here, and here's Korea, and that's all they cared about. Japanese sailors typically never sailed outside of the sight of land. They didn't know what a compass was. They didn't know the world was round. And so here are these Spanish galleons showing up with guys in full suits of steel armor. They must have looked just like aliens from outer space in their spacecraft. But it didn't matter to the samurai. They would fight to the death on the beach. So the Spanish attempted something else. They attempted to convert where the conquistadors stayed on their ships. They sent missionaries to try and convert the Japanese peasants to being Catholics. So they would have fealty to Spain because it was a Catholic power and it saved their souls, and that they were all servants of the Pope. But at the same time when this was happening, and this is discussed in the book Shogun and the movie Shogun, Japan was then unified. Japan, in response to this terrifying new menace, the second kind of Mongol invasion, the Spanish guys, they unified and they became one of the warlords was able to dominate all of Japan. And the first thing he did was kick out all the Spanish missionaries and tell all of the Japanese peasants who had become Catholics, you're just being disloyal to Japan. You're going to cease this Christianity stuff immediately. Are there any questions? Someone raised their hands and he pointed at them, and the fellow was taken out and killed in a gruesome way in front of everybody. And then he says, Lord Toranaga says to the crowd, are there any more questions? So Japan eradicated its Christian population as a means of self-defense, and the Spanish were then locked out of Japan. And only the Portuguese could trade it at some southern ports, one of which was Nagasaki. And they were restricted to within a mile or two from the water of the port. The Japanese government was intensely paranoid about these Europeans. So Japan went into a period of seclusion. And finally, though, at the turn of the century, after the age of colonization by the European powers, there were only two indigenous peoples on earth who were fully sovereign. One was Japan, the other was Ethiopia. And the Japanese realized they'd fallen behind the rest of the world, so they began a vigorous campaign of learning the new technologies and educating themselves, and of course became one of the first nations of the earth. And so my model is that this planet can be the Japan of the galaxy, of course avoiding World War II. Yes, let's avoid that. But we can eject these hostile aliens who are attempting a a covert takeover. And in fact, just by this conference that we're doing, we are spreading awareness. I do not believe, in fact, here's what I do believe. I believe that if proceeding with this campaign of what I call exposure rather than exposure, then disclosure, don't wait for the government to disclose. Expose what we know based on our own assessments, our own estimates of the situation. We have hostile aliens here. They're abducting people. They're mutilating cattle or mutilating people, according to the reports I've heard that are from people I believe. And everyone knows that they cannot take this place. A combination of divine help from friendly ETs, and human ingenuity, the fact that we're quick learners once we figure out what we need to learn, and also our own innate valor and bravery, they cannot take this place. We will remain sovereign. And of course, a certain degree of unification. The United Nations will become more than just the United Nations. Of course, there's still some issues that have to be taken care of. But anyway, the grand alliance of the human race will occur against this threat. And I believe we will be victorious in the end. We will drive the hostile aliens out of here. A lot of them, as I believe, and I depicted this in this novel I wrote, by the way, were actually mercenaries and had very little enthusiasm for getting shot at by human beings or shot down with microwave beams in their spaceships. They had very little enthusiasm for undergoing that kind of fear ordeal. So anyway, there, I've really summarized my thoughts, and I'll throw open the floor for discussion. I'm sorry if I was a little long-winded.
Dr. Brandenburg, do not apologize. Thank you for being here with us. I like to believe that we put a sexy spin on doom deep, we doom dark, we doom hard, but we even accept
Absolutely. You'll love
positive.
my novel. You'll love my novel then, because it is noir. I call it noir. But of course, it has two beautiful women save the world.
Well, Dr. Brandenburg, we'll get. Is it on Amazon? I don't want you to
Yes,
move
it
your
is on
mouse.
Amazon.
Please don't move your mouse cursor. I'll have my people find a way to push it up. We'll promote it. We'll put it in the comments. All right. Just
Okay.
don't move your
Also, by the
computer.
way, if you want to see, there is a video. The book is long. By the way, it was read. I actually asked permission to write it based on, I said I was working with the agencies, people from the agencies, and at their farewell lunch, I mentioned, I wanted to write a science fiction novel, and I was going to use some of the stuff I'd heard around the coffee machine and water cooler. And they said, to my surprise, they said, why, John, we always liked your reports. Why don't you write that novel? We'll read it. Just make sure it is labeled science fiction, they said.
Right. So you had to create real science and just slap
Oh,
fiction on top of it.
absolutely. Yeah, Sir Francis Bacon put it best. He said, sometimes when something is hard to tell people, the best way to make it plausible to everybody is through fiction. That was Sir
Well,
Francis Bacon writing down at the time of Queen Elizabeth,
Well,
and
look,
it's
Dr.
true.
Brandenburg, we have so many interesting people here, and
Yes,
I want to manage expectations. All right, you're also incredibly charismatic, and this space almost didn't happen at all because
I'm
as we,
just doing my job. I'm just doing
I
my job, Ulrich.
I know, but part of your job is being very charismatic, and we almost didn't make the space happen because we almost couldn't tech troubleshoot because you kept on telling me so many interesting things, and I kept on saying, "Save it for the space, save it for the space," and people here don't know how many times your computer has been reset. It's a number that's
I
greater
know.
than zero and less than infinity. So I think, and so before you even started speaking, my phone was blowing up with DMs of people saying I have so many questions for you, for
Sure,
Marshall, and for Reed.
I'll try to
Well,
answer as many questions as time allows. I want other speakers to have their chance to respond, and I also
unfortunately,
want to hear what they think.
well, they are going to, I hope they get a chance to ask their questions, but there's also other personalities that are much more charming than me, are much more witty, that I want you and Marshall and Reed to interact with. No, genuinely. Don't,
Yeah.
be careful. I'm about to set you up here. So what I would really love is for you to just engage with the panel. We may add one or two more people. I would really love for you, Reed and Marshall, and everybody else we have up here to engage in a conversation. And I'd like for you to take it wherever you like. And if you still do not hate me, and Reed and Marshall, if you're
Wow.
in, well, just give it time. Just give it time, Dr. Brandenburg. And if you guys at the end would like to do this again, because I don't like to rush people. Do you know what I mean? I would love a Q&A because we do
Yeah.
our doomer spaces. Normally we sell adult diapers, catheters. People know they're here for like 8 to 10 hours. This is a real thing. Like
Wow.
Tom can attest to this. Yeah. Tom, please tell them I'm not lying because I sound like a liar. See, the thumbs up means I'm not lying.
No, you're totally telling the truth. I mean, when I did one with you guys, it went on for like what, like 11 hours. I mean, but I was trying to set a record, and we actually
Was
more
this
than
That
about
was
exceeded
your
it.
first
catheters or
space.
something?
Well, no, I'm saying people hydrate. Do you know what I mean? They get their electrolytes straightened out. They know that we're going to do them for a long time. And we
Sure.
do have another space coming up, in a bit less than 2 hours, and that's probably going to feel like 5 minutes. So I want to unmute. I want to let you direct things.
Uh,
And
okay,
anybody we have here.
I want to just say one thing about my collaboration earlier with Allies of Humanity that was very, very helpful.
This is all
When
you.
they,
I'm gonna let it free, and this is you talk, and other people can jump in. And we're not gonna do hands unless it gets really violent. But other than that, I think we're free to let things be.
okay,
Dr. B, this is your space.
in 1 minute, Allies of Humanity, Marshall Summers and his group were very helpful in encouraging me to finish this long novel that I wrote. And by the way, you can find a video synopsis of it, Morning Star Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover Up, third edition on YouTube. So it's a half-hour synopsis of, it's just a synopsis. So it leaves out a lot of the juicy stuff and everything. But anyway, so the Allies of Humanity helped me by encouraging this. They helped me get it edited. It's one thing to write a novel, another thing to get it proofed and edited. And I will also report, by the way, that people on the inside of the UFO cover up contacted me saying they had read the novel and basically raved over it. They said, "How did you get so many things right?" And I said, "Well, I just connected the dots. Once you come across the fundamental premise that you have a hostile alien trying to do a covert takeover, and then you figure out, one person actually who confirmed to me there was a UFO cover up, said, yes, there's an extraterrestrial threat whose existence is classified, Dr. Brandenburg, and that's all I can tell you. You can figure out the rest yourself from what's in the open, in open media. And so anyway, but allies were very helpful in encouraging me to do this. I will also mention at the same time when I was staying at one of their apartments just for a day, but anyway, and they were listening to readings from the novel that I'd written and encouraging me that they thought this was good stuff. I was able to go up to University of Arizona from that place and ask them to take a new picture of the second face we found at a place called Galaxis Chaos on Mars, and University of Arizona, using the Odysseus Odyssey spacecraft at Mars Odyssey, they took the picture and it confirmed, yes, it's a face. So we have two good pictures. In fact, we have multiple good pictures of that face now. And that was just the face and a pyramid right next to it in Cydonia. And then we have the Galaxis face. We have Cydonia face, Galaxis face, both faces wearing helmets, looking very humanoid. And then we have the five-sided pyramid within 15 miles of the face of Cydonia. And the people who helped confirm that were also allies of humanity with their support and encouragement. So I am deeply grateful to them and the Mars front and the science fiction front for articulating to the people what is going on, how much danger we are in. The secret treaty, particularly. A secret treaty exists between the U.S. and government and alien entities. It has now been widely reported. And this treaty was negotiated without the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate by ambassadors it did not appoint, and it was never ratified by the Senate. And that means that when the UFO cover-up ends, we're going to have a constitutional crisis on top of everything else. So that scenario is covered in the book and also in the video synopsis. Just to give you a hint, when the UFO cover-up starts to really unravel in DC, the powers that be in the secret government decide that it is too big to fail. They can't allow it to fail. They attempt a military coup d'etat using their own paramilitary forces. I won't leave anything else except to say it's got two beautiful women. Anyway, it's got a bunch of rough, tough special forces guys. It's great. Highly recommend it. One guy who
Um,
read it, named Hal Puthoff, you've all heard of him. He called it War and Peace, the highest
yeah.
compliment a Russian American could ever give to any piece of work like that. Anyway, so there, and now I'm going to stop. I'm going to shut up,
What?
and you guys can talk.
Reed, just jump in.
Yep. Yeah, I got a quickie. Well, just John, I look forward to reading the book. First off, I do want to correct one thing, though. I don't believe Marshall, myself, or our organization has ever interacted with you. This Twitter space is the first meeting of minds. So I don't know who
In
in.
terms of you guys, yes, but there was a member. I'm trying to remember what his name was. He was a wonderful fellow.
Yeah, no, there's. I just want to correct for the record. None of us have ever encouraged your book. It might have been a reader of the Allies, but those are not members of our organization. I know.
Who knows? Perhaps this is a scurrilous rumor. But anyway, no, members of your organization or who is associates of your organization encouraged me to write the book. They listened to my readings from it and pronounced it powerful and meaningful. And it was somebody in, I think it was Tucson, Arizona, or maybe
That's
Scottsdale.
fine. It's news to me. It's news to me. All right, I'll relinquish the mic.
John, are you able to? Sorry, Dr. Brandenburg, are you able to see?
Can I jump in, or is it,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
should I
I
wait?
wanted. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Jump in, Eric Actor.
Okay, a quick question for Dr.
Yes.
John, and then my follow-up question would be for Marshall and Reed. Is you mentioned about eradication, and my question would be: I'm assuming you're not kidding, but
Oh,
and so
no, I'm
if you're
not
not
kidding. I'm
kidding,
not
has
kidding.
somebody? Okay, so let me ask you this: as much as you can tell us, what, and I know you probably can't give us names, but what factions of our leadership have shown you this plan, and can you tell us a little bit more about this plan, because I'm quite curious
Well,
about this.
actually, it was published in MUFON Journal in 1990. I have an X posting where I discuss it. It's the one in fact, it is the one that says disclosure equals survival. The original post of mine that says disclosure equals survival has a link to that article. It's gotten 60,000 hits.
Could you repost that at
Was
some
that?
point, John? Just when you get a chance, when you get a chance, can you repost that so we don't have to go digging
I
around
can do
for
it.
it if you
Sure,
can?
sure.
I
Please.
can do it.
I'll get it reposted. And basically, I deduced this just based on publicly known data. and we'd already found evidence for just a planetary scale nuclear massacre on Mars. So I was very aware that bad things didn't just happen on Earth. So then
So I believe your story. I actually believe you 100% about your Mars analysis. I no doubt about that. I'm just trying to figure out how you guys decided in 19. I'm
Oh
not
no
trying to
no
be
no
funny here,
no
but how
oh
you
no no
decided around 19.
I talked to John Lear, and I also talked to Leon Stregfield. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us. Basically, I drew from a numerous. I talked to some abductee, Bud Hopkins, and I basically just arrived at a hypothesis of reticulan intentions. Reticulans meaning grays, and the fact that they're trying to build hybrids who have a human immune system, despite their physiology apparently being completely different than ours. They're based on copper based blood, apparently hemocyanin, which is found in octopi and tarantulas and scorpions. It's a well-known blood pigment on Earth. It's bluish instead of red. And so I put that together just by thinking about it. And I was sitting on the board of the Fund for UFO Research with Bruce Maccabee and a bunch of other people. And I gave that, I ran it by them, and they were astonished and said, well, it's probably true. And the problem with trying to create a bunch of hybrids like that is then you have to introduce that to the planet. And, by that point, human beings will have figured out what's going on. So you have to basically get rid of the human beings. You can't. And there's a lot of places in the colonial era, like Argentina, where the local Native American populations were simply exterminated completely. They didn't leave one standing because they could not. Well, I wasn't there. I don't know what all the details were, but they in Argentina, the Indian population was, or Native American population was just completely exterminated. And after decades of war with the Spanish settlers, and so it is not a phenomenon that's unknown on Earth. And you have two competing species of intelligence, and one of them decides the planet is the land or the planet is not big enough for both of you, and so they just get rid of you. And of course we know what genocide looks like in the modern day. So these are not impossible ideas. We have seen them. And now I will mention also I know a friend who was involved in law enforcement. He was retired. He was a well-known person in UFO circles. I'm not going to give his name because he hasn't given me permission for this, and it's a private conversation. But he'd heard of human mutilations, and he basically contacted somebody in the FBI that he had worked with when he was a policeman, and he said to him, is there any set of kind of human mutilation cases that resemble the cattle mutilations that are found on the ranches? And the guy said, oh, I know who to ask about that. This is somebody at the local FBI office in the state where he worked. And he said, let me get back to you on that. So a week later, he called me back and he said, well, he talked to his friend at the FBI, talked to this other guy at the FBI about human mutilations following the same patterns as the cattle mutilations. And the guy's only response was, who wants to know? So therefore, that I regard that as a absolute confirmation that yes, that is occurring also, and the government is covering that up as quickly as it can. They don't care about
Thank
the
you.
cow.
Thank
They
you,
don't
Dr.
care
John.
about the cows. They can't do anything about the cows out in pastures. And and by the way,
Well, they're
these are
using the cows as part of the hybridization program. I don't know if you're
well,
aware of that or not. That's why they're.
actually, there's another aspect to the cow mutilation, leaving them for their owners to find. It's called the horse head in the bed scene from Godfather. Guy wakes up with the head of his favorite racehorse in bed with him, and this is called terrorization. They might as well attach a note saying, "We can do the same to you and your family." And by the way, this is an old human thing in zones of conflict that people don't like to talk about. Mutilating people and animals and leaving them for other people to find is a classic way of terrorizing populations.
All right, it's getting spicy here.
No, I don't mean to cut you off, Dr. John. I just want to throw in one more
Yes,
question real
absolutely.
quick if I can. I really appreciate you, though.
I'll
I mean
try and
that.
answer it quickly.
Well, I'm going to go to Reed if he wants, and Marshall if they want to comment,
Yes,
because
yes.
I understand that television and movies are what they are. However, I think any of us who have done enough research and watched enough of these films, the amount of films that came out in the 50s was incredible.
Yes.
But getting to the point, in 1967 and 1968, there was a series called The Invaders
Oh, yes. I
that
watched
came
it
out.
carefully.
Yes, and then in '84, I believe they had the first version of B, but then the version of B that came out, I believe it was sometime in the 2000s, might have been 2010 or I forget, but that is an incredible series. So I guess what I'm getting at is, and I mean, this is really out there, but can we not rule this out as this is a possibility that these human type, non-humans, we'll call them, but they look human, could potentially become part of our society and literally manipulate things, and we as humanity don't even know that we're actually being manipulated by these people that look just like
I
us.
will tell you a conversation I had in Washington, D.C., and people talked to me because they knew I had done this work on Mars. And they would basically feel like, well, I could ask Brandenburg questions because he's already open to the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence. And this one guy came into my office where I was working at this one government think tank, and we all have security clearances. It's a secure facility. He comes into my office and says, John, he says, I've talked to some people who are really concerned that there are extraterrestrial aliens down here who look just like us. And they're trying to figure out how to tell them from human beings, terrestrials. And by that time, I was writing the novel. In the novel, I had this team it was called Operation Dark Carnival. It was a bunch of special forces people, and they called them the Carney, like Carney people, traveling carnival. And they had special German shepherds who could sniff out extraterrestrials. I told him, I said, why don't you get some trained sniffer dogs? The dogs can smell everything about somebody, and they live through their noses. We live through our eyes; they live through their noses. And he said,
Well, but
thank you.
if they've got a crooked pinky finger, you can tell that way too, right?
Well, anyway, so he looked really amazed and then walked out of my office. And a week later, he comes back and he says, I told those people about your canine unit things, and they really like the idea and they're going to try it. So that's a conversation I had in Washington, D.C. And at that point, by the way, I had already found out there was a UFO cover up. It had been told to me by one fellow at the Pentagon, and he basically said, yeah, there's an extraterrestrial threat whose existence is classified, and that's all I can tell you. The rest you can figure out. And then I confirmed it with somebody else, an Air Force, the guy I talked to was Army, and then I talked to somebody from the Air Force, and he confirmed it. He said, yes, that's true. And and by the way, it was devastating for me to figure that out. I thought of just quitting completely working for the government. But after 3 or 4 days of feeling utterly miserable and betrayed, and because I talked to several abductees by that point and realized the government knows that this is going on and it's letting it happen. But anyway, I woke up one morning and thought well, things could be worse. I could be French. Because the French government doesn't follow it. Their motto is rules are for fools. They don't feel bound by any international agreements or constitutional agreements. The French are into survival. They'll do whatever they think is necessary, even more cloak and daggerish than we are. And we, of course, all know that the CIA and the other agencies, they have this cloak and dagger department that doesn't follow the normal rules of diplomacy or anything else. So anyway, I just say that's one way you can tell. Also, I believe they'll have facial recognition software now. I mean, that conversation about the canine units, that took place in the late 80s or early 90s. So that's a more than 30-year-old conversation. Using facial recognition software, I believe they would be able to tell ETs. Some of the ETs who look human are very friendly. They're Pleiadians, or what we call Pleiadians. I don't like calling them Nordics. That sounds too, I don't like the sound. So I call them Pleiadians or Lyrians. By the way, if you want to know where the first Lyrian depicted in science fiction occurs, it's in a Walt Disney movie called Moon Pilot, and it's a lovely woman who later starts a family with the astronaut that she befriends and helps. So anyway, by the way, the best movie about all of this is The Mysterians, made by the Japanese people who made the Godzilla movies. This movie was made in 1957. It depicts UFO abductions, hybridization civilizations with human beings. It depicts human traders and underground alien bases and a complete alien disregard for human life. Also, a lot of directed energy weapons are employed in that movie. It's a great movie. The Mysterian,
I
1957.
watched that movie after you mentioned that in a space before, and it was very hard to find, but I went and found it and watched it and found it quite entertaining.
I mean, here's these women standing in the back. One woman is Japanese, lovely Japanese woman standing in the backyard, and UFO parks over her backyard and picks her up with a tractor beam
All
and
right.
takes her to this alien base. Yes.
So, Dr. Brandenburg, I want to make sure that you can see.
We got Reed with
Yeah,
his hand up.
get.
Ulrich, you
Oh
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
go? I'm not
Okay,
trying to
okay.
run
And
the
I'm
show here,
sorry.
brother.
I'm sorry. I'm so
No, no, no.
long-winded.
It's fine.
All right. Yeah. No, just to answer Eric, yeah, your question, which if I recall, was kind of about integration and on almost like the seamless and visible nature of it. I think it's a really good question, and it kind of challenges some of our notions about this word colonization, if that's what the end game ends up being. I think integration with humanity, us into them, them into us, is a good way to see this. And in light
With
of
the
that,
Pleiadians, sure. With the Pleiadians,
yeah,
fine.
I'm talking about the group of collectives that are engaged in genetic breeding with the human species.
Well,
And,
I mean,
this,
the Greys are doing it for hostile reasons. I think the Pleiadians, some of them are probably they may be on the lam from the Pleiades for all I know, and they're hiding out here on Earth.
yeah. Well, I don't think those genetically altering the human race would be a beneficial force by any stretch. I think genetic alteration without permission, without collaboration, is pure violation of
Well,
sovereignty. But I just wanted to say that, from the Allies' perspective, what they say is it's not lording over us as a colonizer, like we might do in the third world, as a Western nation. It's rather integration and alteration of us neurologically over time. And that starts with the leadership. And so the goal being to create a human alien hybrid that we would not detect as alien, obviously, and to not disclose their presence here. I want to introduce this really interesting idea to you all. Who wants disclosure? Well, I'll tell you what, the NHI does not want disclosure. So as we go into the years ahead, keep an eye out for who is for and against disclosure. What governments in the world are for and against disclosure? What elements of current military industrial complexes are for and against? This is a litmus test for which side
I can
people are
answer that
lining up on.
question to some degree.
Go for it.
It's my understanding the government is, of course, full of factions, and one of the factions that wants disclosure is headed by the CIA and the DIA. I don't know what other agencies, but also the Navy wants disclosure to happen. And they are being, of course, opposed by other factions within the Defense Department, particularly the Air Force. You'll notice all of these people, all of these videotapes and data being provided are being
Mhm.
provided by the Navy. And what's his name? The fellow at Stanford, Dolan.
Gary Nolan.
There's a Nolan and a Dolan, and I keep getting them.
So
Richard
Richard
Dolan.
Dolan.
Yeah, he works for the
No,
CIA and the
no,
Navy,
no.
and he's
I think you might be talking about Gary Nolan,
no. This guy
or are
works
we
at
talking?
Stanford. This guy works.
Okay, no, whole other. Yeah, that's Gary Nolan, but okay.
Okay, is that Gary Nolan?
Oh yeah,
Okay, because I think well, anyway, so that those are three, and and I put that, by the way, I put the divided. I didn't name. I said there'd been a reorganization of the intelligence community, so I gave everybody different names, new names, and to make it very science fictiony. So,
John. If I can, if
but
I can interrupt, John,
they're
if I
definite
can,
factions, and some factions are favoring aggressive disclosure, and others are not. They're into trench warfare. They will do the Fuhrer bunker if they have to. The last
mm,
stand. By the way, the story is what one report is that Hitler believed up until the very end that Reptoid or people from Aldebaran were going to come rescue him in the Third Reich. And that's one reason he wouldn't surrender. They fought bitterly to the very last. And guess what happened? Did anybody show up to rescue him? No. So the aliens turned out if aliens were telling him they were doing that, they turned out to be as big a liars as he was.
John. If I can interrupt, I think another point I was trying to make is,
Yes.
to take the 100,000 foot view, because yeah, down on the ground, I'm sure there are numerous factions and sub factions and lineages of people in secrecy, who have passed the baton at the end of their career or at the end of their life. But at the 100,000 foot level, there is an alien secrecy that, in
Oh,
some
yes.
ways, initiated the government secrecies, envelops it and drives it forward and sets the beat. And I think it's just important to
I agree
understand.
completely.
Yeah, and so this alien presence does not want disclosure. Why? Because integration with the ultimate goal of, I guess you could say, colonization, is a very long long game approach. And it would be very disruptive to have a lot of people suddenly thinking about certainly an alien in the world. I think it would be absolutely inimical to the
Oh,
integration goal.
it would make it
And
impossible. You'd have
exactly.
to
And
have a
so,
war.
right.
Instead of having a Sun Tzu type victory without a shot being fired, you'd have to have a war.
Exactly. And so, who wants disclosure and who doesn't? Now, I don't say that those who don't are inherently with this
They,
intervention, but as time goes
the Greys don't want disclosure because it would interfere with their activities of hybrid of trying to make a robust hybrid.
yep.
And
Yeah.
So I was trying to be a bad guy. I just can't do it. We might have to transition to
be
hands.
bad. Oh, here, let me be
I
bad.
want to be bad
Let
so
me be
bad,
bad.
Dr. Brandenburg.
I'll just say this to Reed and Summer. I love your view of the universe as kind of with there's adult supervision out there and a bunch of nice agreements between people, and that they're all a bunch of ladies and gentlemen out there. There's just a few bad actors. No, it's a jungle out there,
Okay,
just like the Earth.
yeah,
And
and
if this thing doesn't get solved, we're going to have a war with the aliens, one group of them.
just so you know, you
And
guys,
it'll be like any other war, full of horror and suffering and massive loss of life. For what purpose?
and Dr. Brandenburg, you don't need to hold back. This is the doom room, so you can doom hard and read.
I'm dooming hard here.
You,
I mean,
you can doom as
read
deep,
my novel
as hard,
or watch
and
the
as
synopsis.
yeah. So you can doom as hard as you like. So you don't need to hold back. I'm the one who always gets accused of fear mongering. Reed, I love your point.
All right, Dr. John, we got a lot of
I
hands up
know.
here, brother.
Yeah.
I
Can
love you
Eric
though.
hear me? I don't want to add more people right now. Dr. Brandenburg, I'll let you finish your thought, and then we're going to go in the order of
Yeah,
Ashton,
I just
Tom, and then crypto terrestrial. So go ahead, Dr. Brandenburg.
when I said that I have that difference of opinion with the allies of humanity, I say that with all due respect to Marshall and Reed. My interpretation is that this is a very, very ugly situation and could get much, much uglier than it is now. Just watch the synopsis of the novel on YouTube in 30 minutes. You'll understand.
Thank you. And I
Yeah.
think it's Ashton.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ashton.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna be very quick. I really appreciate all the speakers in here as well. A lot of really cool people who are talking. Dr. Brandenburg was just talking as well about these factions that supposedly exist in the government, which I really piqued my interest because that's kind of what I've heard as I've been investigating into it. And actually, I just posted a clip, I think a couple days ago, where Joshua Reed, his podcast, he was interviewing General Flynn, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he actually just by name mentions the extraterrestrials that control our government, which was an eye-opening clip to hear from somebody who was in his position. So it does make me wonder if there is not that conflict going on. And then in terms of, I don't know who will win and if we'll ever end up getting the truth about the nature of the phenomena in general. So that's all I just wanted to chime in with. Thank you very much, sir.
Ashton, you don't
Thank
have
you.
any questions about the electric universe? Dr. Brandenburg, you told me you thought you just had a breakthrough. I'd love for like Tom and Ashton and Dr. Brandenburg to have some electric magic going on here. Am I forcing things?
Some
I'll
electrifying
pass.
conversations.
I'll pass my time to Tom. I think Tom will probably have better questions than I do on that front.
Go for it, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Before I get to a question on that, I just wanted to make a quick point about what Reed said, and also Dr. John, which is that if basically any force that is anti-disclosure is probably not going to be on the side of the aliens, and I do think that's generally true. However, I do also see a possibility that when we're talking about disclosure, we're talking about full, truthful disclosure. And that's the one thing, of course, that no alien force on Earth really wants, because it would compromise their agenda, right? However, okay.
It'll make it impossible.
However, right. Yeah. Now, here's the issue, though. The issue is that if there is a forced timeline, whether due to cataclysms or the particular rate of human resource consumption or whatever the rate is, which they can't fully control, then if the timeline is forced and they have to do things sooner than they would prefer, it might be possible for them to want a partial, misleading, false disclosure that they can control that would actually benefit their agenda. So in other words, if they can't fully cover up their existence, they can at least steer our perception of it. And that's a pattern that I've detected in a lot of the alien disinformation that's been out there over the past, several decades, right? So if we do have something that is, quote, pro-disclosure, I mean, if you think about it, like Stephen Greer is pro-disclosure, but, whose side he's on is up for debate,
He's not here. So
right. Yeah. So
Greer,
what I'm
Greer
saying
is
is,
not here in
we
this
have to watch
forum,
out.
and there's a reason for that.
Yes. Yeah. So if something's pro disclosure, we also have to look at what kind of disclosure they're for and how they're going about it and what the ultimate ends of that is. So I just wanted to kind of add that asterisk to what was being said. And I'm sure Reed and Marshall agree with that. So I wanted to add that. And my question for you on the plasma hypothesis is, well, you talked about the ancient nuclear cataclysm on Mars,
Yes.
for example, and how there were various isotopes discovered. So just since you have a background in plasma
Yes.
physics, my question to you is whether, I don't know, like the electric universe theory, the plasma stuff, the high voltages and currents that were exchanged between celestial objects, can that
That's a
induce any
very,
sort
very
of
good question.
isotope
Very good
changes?
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I will address that question. I certainly looked at that possibility, and I think it can be ruled out. I am a plasma physicist. I work on fusion energy, which, by the way, is the ultimate form of energy, which is going to empower humanity. And it's going to, once you have access to fusion energy, you can solve all these environmental problems. You can suck CO2 out of the air and turn it into coal and bury it in these nice holes in the ground we have dug. I mean, you can do that if you've got fusion energy. So I'm a fusion guy. I have my own fusion concept called the RT rifle toroidal pinch that I presented recently at a conference. I'm trying to get that published. By the way, right now I can't afford publication charges to get my stuff that I'm doing into journals, because it's usually to put it into a good journal, it takes $1,000. Believe it or not, even after you get it so that the people, the editors at the journals like it, you still have to pay them $1,000. So if anyone wants to support my research in terms of helping me to pay paid charges for the articles that I write and get accepted, I will certainly not turn that down at this point. But here's the question. Could there have been a high voltage discharge, kind of a super aurora between Mars and something else that caused this cataclysm? And the answer is no. The solar flare type things that occur are basically just hydrogen and helium. But the impact zones on Mars that show radioactivity, residual radioactivity, where apparently the super weapons, we're talking hydrogen bombs as big as the Empire State Building, dropped from space, detonating in midair, craters at sites, just like there aren't any craters at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's because the air bursts are far more destructive and effective in destroying things, but they're full of not only potassium, which when it gets irradiated with neutrons has a long memory. It stays radioactive for billions of years. So they're hotspots of radioactive potassium on what used to be the old ocean bottom on Mars in the north, but also they're full of thorium. Thorium is a very heavy element. You don't find that in a solar flare. You find it in hydrogen bombs. Remember the bomb they tested up in Amchatka in Alaska? It was an anti-missile warhead. It was full of thorium. That's declassified. That's been declassified. In fact, what's interesting is when I found the thorium on Mars, they declassified that little item, the bomb, what was called the Kaneken test. You can look it up on Wikipedia, and it was done on Amchatka in Alaska, 5 megatons, and it was full of thorium, which enhances the neutron output of the warhead. So anyway, that's my way of addressing the possibility that this was some freak discharge between planets. And it looks like the solar system has been pretty much had the same structure with these planets with circular orbits in the order they're in since time immemorial. I mean, since the origin. That's what it looks like to me. But the thorium at the radioactive sites indicates this was not a freak solar flare effect.
Speaking of that, with the recent Arrow report that came out, it was saying there's like nothing to see here. I feel like,
I know.
yeah, I feel like
these aren't the droids you're looking for. They can go about their business.
essentially, yeah, it was shenanigans. But I feel like this summer and next fall, there was a news report that just came out this month saying that the polar vortex reversed its direction, and so now it's going in reverse.
Oh, well, the polar vortex reverses its direction every 11 years.
Right. What I was getting to is we're also
people. I mean, doomsday is a business now, unfortunately, and people are saying, "Oh, the Atlantic, the Gulf Stream is going to reverse the Atlantic," and they say, "Well, you ask when?" They say, "Oh, 50 years from now."
Well, yeah, I'm referring
Or they
to
say, or the Earth's solar, the Earth's magnetic field is going to reverse.
it's reducing.
Well, of
Yeah, we're
course it
going through
will.
the
It's done it.
full shift.
It's done it hundreds of times, and the human race survived that when it happened most recently about 100,000 years ago. So it's just these things are just natural cycles. They're
Yeah,
like thunderstorms.
absolutely.
They're
It's
noisy and scary, but ultimately they don't eradicate life on Earth. Big asteroid, somebody dropping big hydrogen bombs from space as big as the Empire State Building, that eradicates life. These things are, I don't mean to minimize their importance. I'm just saying, by the way, once we get fusion energy, we kind of immunize ourselves against a lot of these problems because we'll be empowered. For one thing, we won't burn any more fossil fuels for energy, and we'll have so much energy we can actually start re-terraforming the planet to repair some of this damage we've done to it.
Are you still interested in answering questions, Dr. Brandenburg?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Here I am. I'll get off my soapbox. Yes.
No, it's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and not ask mine, but I do see two other hands. Eric, you can go first, and crypto terrestrial.
I think crypto's been waiting for a while. I think
Oh, okay,
we
and
need to
Eric
Yes,
dropped
introduce
in
him.
please,
now.
please, crypto.
Yeah, go ahead, crypto terrestrial.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. First, I just want to say before anything else, Dr. Brandenburg, Messrs. Summers, Elder, and Younger, I really appreciate all the work that you guys have done on this topic. I think it's been really important. And I know for me, in like formulating the conceptual model that I work with, it's derived a lot from the material that you both brought to the table. And so, that's really important. And, thank you from the bottom of my heart. What I wanted to
Okay,
ask though.
what kind of work do you? What kind of work
Oh,
do
just
you?
the
I'm
research
sorry.
on
You
this.
do.
I mean, I'm not like a professional. I don't have a bucket out, so to speak, asking for money. Just in terms of researching this as somebody with a interest.
I'm looking for publication charges.
I know
I
people with
got.
money, Dr. Brandenburg. If you want, I'd be happy to message you privately and set something up. Like I don't know, where they are, but I've got like 6 different
Well,
things
I'm
I'm
trying
juggling. I'm
to.
trying to fundraise for. I could probably hook you up with some people.
By the way, the more people understand what a flying triangle or a UFO how it is flying, the less mystery and fear it will generate, and the more curiosity. And I, by the way, DARPA, we all know who DARPA is. They gave me $200,000 to refine my gravity theory, and over 2 years. So I did it. I smoothed out things. There were little places where there were slight gaps, and I was able to fill them in and take care of it all. And and when they gave me the money, they said, Dr. Brandenburg, we're going to give you $200,000 to do this research for the next 2 years. We want a full report. Don't do any experiments.
That is, it's
With
interesting how the
sort of
money
the
impacts all
implication that
this.
if I did experiments, I would be what? What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just saying how interesting it is how the funding does impact the way that the research goes with it.
Oh, yes. Yes. So they
But
they
on
told
that
me
topic,
no
though, these
experiments,
days
and
there's a
then
lot of options.
yes, there are.
Let me let you finish your thought. I'm going to mute until you're done. I apologize.
Oh, I'll just simply say I handed in my report to them. They seemed very pleased, and they said, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out of the building." And apparently, what they wanted to know was how much did I know? My work was
And
not classified at all, and they
it's
apparently
interesting that
wanted to
they'd
be
be
able to
willing to
compare
spend
it
that much money
in
for it.
detail with whatever. It is interesting.
If you're not obligated to
And
any
I thought
NDAs
that they
or
were
it's
going to
not
give me another.
classified,
I thought they were going to give me $1 million. What's that?
if you're
I'm
not
sorry.
under any NDAs and it's not classified, what do you think would be the most shocking thing that you could reveal to the room?
No, it was not. It was not classified. I published the results of it in a journal in India that does fundamental.
Okay, Dr. B, I'm going to interrupt you. And Crypto, I'm going to interrupt you as well. I apologize for that. But I believe Reed and Marshall might have to leave the space in about 15 minutes. So what we want to do is, Dr. B, if you're still with us, that's great, is we're going to open up questions for Reed and Marshall so that we can respect their time and let them go in about 15 minutes. So if you have a question for Reed and Marshall, please keep your hand up.
Well, could I ask the question that I was going to ask to Dr. Brandenburg to them? Because I also am kind of up
Oh,
against the time
yes. If
thing
you
a
have a
little bit
question
here.
for Reed and Marshall, perfect. Go
Yeah,
right ahead.
yeah, and Fringe, you're talking to the speakers already up here, right? Because I think the whole room,
Yes.
right, we're not going to get, if you're not already up here, we're going to try to hold another space. And Marshall, if you don't have to leave, you're welcome to stay. But we're going to have another space, I think, it seems like, where we can take a lot more questions. So So just the people who are already up here at this point.
Sounds good. So the question that I had, and it comes from in the Allies of Humanity material, the briefings where it talks about the intervention being of a commercial nature at kind of its core essence. And I found that so interesting because a lot of this has kind of gone in the direction of seeing models in, for example, the East India Trading Company that are analogous to what we're seeing with the relations with the treaties and the technology and the kind of the fake existing governments being subordinated to foreign powers. So more broadly speaking, because this is a very practical matter for a lot of people who are involved with markets or who work for a company or anything like that. To what degree do you think that human commercial activity is dictated by, controlled, or impacted by non-human intelligence, and in what specific ways? And again, thank you all for what you do.
Marshall, you want to take that, or want me to have a whack at it?
Why don't you have a whack at it, and then I will comment afterward.
Okay, great. Well, Marshall and I, we try to keep our fingers out of certain arenas that are super speculative and that simply we just do not have intel on. So I wouldn't name any specific technologies myself. I know the UFO community has a lot of suspicions around a lot of different things. In my mind, the intervention would want to utilize existing force generated by humans in our own space for their behalf. So it's kind of like in judo, you convert the energetic movement of your opponent and redirect it for your own ends. So in that sense, the intervention, in our view, is not like the source or like the creator of a lot of what we see per se. I'm sure it is the creator of some of what we see. And I'm talking about wars, geopolitical events, economic crises, climate events, all that. So we don't pin a lot of that to the intervention in a causative kind of way. We definitely look for the power dynamic because the intervention is really about power, and they're operating through channels of power in our world. And the Allies do talk about that, how basically they are a hierarchical set of organizations that operate with a hive mind. And so wherever that can be continued via existing government, economy, so forth, society, they would probably seek to use that. So they're using our pre-existing kind of human trends for their own purposes. I would say they're definitely planting certain seeds, certain technological seeds that might kind of sprout and grow the forest, so to speak, that they need ultimately as kind of the tech ecosystem that would support their overall agenda and the way they operate, because they have a very rigid operative model. It's how the Allies painted, and I think there's indication of that as well in terms of what we can observe. They are inflexible. This is pure playbook intervention. These are not innovative, creative forces that sit around a board table and kind of like, do an agile approach where everybody stands up and gives the 5 minute on their division of Earth intervention. This is hive mind operating in super well laid plans. So, but they ultimately need the kind of tech, social, psycho ecosystem in which they can function and thrive. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised if they've dropped a few little trinkets, in the human space and let those kind of flourish and grow. I won't myself subjectively guess as to exactly what those are, but I think it's just important to know that they're using what already exists in the world. They're turning up the volume on the music we're already playing, and then they're turning down the volume on certain other signals that are present in the world, all to kind of shape in a way that's really difficult to put a causative relationship to them. And I think that makes perfect sense. Marshall, do you want to jump into?
Yeah, I think of it also another way that they're investing in human conflict, but not to the point of really massively degrading the world. I mean, they want to make the most powerful nations weaker. And one of the ways you do that is through intractable conflicts that just go on and on and on, and that are led by people who may have been contacted by the intervention in some way. I can't really speculate about that, but they do very stupid ongoing things in protracted conflicts. So I did a piece of writing about how religious fanaticism is being fostered by the intervention. And while it is inherent in certain religious traditions and can be fomented by cultural and economic conditions, it serves the intervention that human conflict continues to degrade societies that have the power or the ability to stand in its way. And so we've seen that certainly since World War II, increasingly with time, that these conflicts are just being perpetuated and continued. So I think that they want to benefit from us losing confidence in our speakers. I've spoken at a couple of conspiracy conferences, and I was amazed at the presenters there claiming to have UFO contacts assisting them. And this was years ago, but it really told to me that they are feeding into the psychology of division to disengage us from the norms of society, to disengage us from the traditional power structures that we have, which are tend to be corrupt, but still they are ours, and they are fomenting the kind of psychology that makes us ever less able to make pure decisions on our own, like the fomenting of AI, for example, which doesn't give you choice; it gives you what to choose from. Basically, that would definitely play into their program, and you see these factors going on now where people are becoming seemingly less and less able to make determinations or come to conclusions. Everything is everybody's opinion. Everything is whatever you think it is. There's nothing really true out there. It's just how you perceive it. These are all narratives that disengage people from their core intelligence, which is not just our intellect, but a deeper knowledge that we all carry, that was given to us by the creator of all life, actually. And the more we become disengaged with that, the more we become products of society. We become controlled by society and cultural values or political movements and so forth. So people become less intelligent in the face of these things, less able to think on their own, think originally, have original thoughts. We're being programmed to think along certain lines, both for economic reasons, but also to serve larger agendas that are in motion in the world. And I think this control of what we think, how we think, and what we choose between represents one of the greatest threats to humanity at this time and can be perpetrated and supported almost invisibly by the presence of the intervention in the world today. They will win us over or defeat us from having the will to resist. That's, we go back to the ancient Chinese teaching about, the best strategy is to have your opponent unwilling or unable to resist. So they're disengaging us from the kind of core technology that gives us insight, strength, and determination, even in difficult situations, even up against serious odds. And so we become ever more reflective of one another, ever more thinking along certain cultural lines that are now being spawned and supported, by industry and commerce, certainly, but for other reasons as well. So I see this happening, and this is why I teach the way of knowledge. It's one of the core things that I teach. It's the core of greater community spirituality, is that we have a deeper mind that is here to prepare us to do our greater work in the world that is not governed by politics or culture or personal preference. But once we become mature enough to value it and find a way to access it, then we begin to live a different kind of life, a more of a mission kind of life, a life that is service-oriented and is not easily persuaded or dissuaded by anything around us, including the presence of foreign races in our world. The control of the mental environment, however, is one of their big agendas. And I think that's something we really have to pay attention to. And one of the ways we can do that, and I just want to add this thought, when we think about these things, it's really important to be objective. Objective means you're seeing, pure objectivity is seeing without preference, or seeing without desiring an outcome or a preferred outcome, which is difficult to do. I mean, if you're used to thinking in a preferred way and looking at everything preferentially, then thinking with that kind of objectivity is difficult, but I think it's really necessary. For example, because I've taught in the realm of spirituality for so many years, I've had to deal with people's notion of love and fear. And what I want to say about love and fear is to see something clearly, you cannot, it's not about being loving or about being fearful. That's subjective and usually self-congratulatory. Real love is something else. Real fear is something else. To look clearly is to see clearly without imposing that kind of value system on your perception. And we need to look clearly regarding this intervention. Its behavior denotes its intent, okay? Unless you want to try to make it into something self-gratifying or self-fulfilling, or it's going to give you what you think, humanity should have and we can never make for ourselves, that's thinking very ambitiously. That's not thinking clearly. So this thinking clearly is just the most important thing. And when you think clearly, it also opens you up to your core spirituality, which is this power of knowledge within you, because it thinks clearly. It's absolutely not influenced by culture, society, or any form of power in the physical universe. And it's not, you
Yes.
can't use it as a tool. It can speak through you and guide you, but you cannot use it as a tool to get what you want. So this is the greater power that we all have that cannot be dissuaded, persuaded. It cannot be subjected. It cannot be won over by any kind of force, be it human or otherwise.
Hey,
And this is the
Marshall,
great power that we all carry. Yes.
if I can just jump in real quick, and I know there's other questions, but I think this matter of technology is really key. And one thing the Allies advocate against is over technology or excessive development of technology. Why? Because it actually inhibits the aspects of our intelligence that relate to perception. of objective reality. Too much technology can get in the way. And if anything, the intervention might be over technologizing our society or advocating for that. So just a thought there. It's not just about what they introduce to our detriment, it's what they introduce that basically inhibits our strength, that prevents our perception of them. And sometimes that has nothing to do specifically with them. And the allies basically talk about, in the mental environment, the energization of our existing human thought space, turning up that temperature and making people feel more agitated, more anxious, even more emotional. Not that any of that has anything to do with the intervention. It's signal and noise. And if you can increase the noise, the signal may not even have to be decreased. So I'll stop there. I know there's other questions.
Thank you, Reed. Go ahead, Tiff.
Nope, I was going to do exactly what you're doing. Thank you so much. Be prepared, not scared, and then get to the hands.
And Reed, anytime you need to interrupt us that you have to go, don't feel like you have to wait us out. We knew we were on about a 15-minute clock, so just keep giving us a heads up when you need to leave. I think Larry's first.
Hey, Marshall and Reed and Ulrich and Fringe. I'm coming from an adversarial point of view compared to you guys. So I'm your adversaries, okay? You talk about being objective, but I don't see objectivity. I see a lot of assumptions, like secrecy implies nefariousness. I also look at the fact that most abductees come away from their experience feeling opened up, feeling expanded in awareness, and they don't regret the experience. So it was not a traumatic experience for them. There are a small percentage who do feel traumatically injured or upset. The other thing is, I look at our world today, and its trajectory is dismal. It looks like we're heading towards World War III. I don't see adults in the room, and the only adults that I'm thinking might exist are above us. And also, I have the question, do you believe in Jesus? Now, I'm not a religious man, but I look at religious texts and I try to determine whether they really happened, whether these are true stories. And if they are, then this man Jesus has been given all authority over the planet. Do you really think that a man with that much power, and I do think it is technological power that he wields, but it is very, very high. Do you really believe that he would just stand by and watch the genocide, which is what you guys are talking about, a controlled, planned genocide of all humans on Earth, to replace them with these hybrids? Do you really believe these hybrids are going to feel good about that?
Hey, Larry. So a few things. I think there's assumptions on both sides of the aisle, but there are what I would call responsible assumptions. And so secrecy relating to a visitor in our space, in our house, an intruder who came in the door unannounced and without permission, their secrecy, I would think, needs to be responsibly assumed to be a risk and a potential threat. It certainly cannot responsibly be assumed to be an act of beneficence, I would argue. Regarding abductees, Harvard physicist John Mack did a study. 67% of abductees reported having negative experiences. 33% reported positive experiences. So this whole narrative about most abductees come away with a good experience, I'm not so sure about that. I don't think that's been demonstrated, and actually the opposite has been demonstrated. And then just to clarify, Marshall and I are definitely not talking about genocide. We're not talking about an elimination scenario. We're talking about an integration scenario. But the interests that are being represented in that, those of the NHI, we're arguing are counter to our own, and that this will alter what it means to be human in ways that we do not advocate. So I just wanted to correct those three things.
Larry, does that help you out, or do you have a follow-up?
I have a follow-up. So if you're not talking about genocide, you're talking about bringing a psionically advanced being into population with non-psionically advanced humans. Which ones do you think are going to fare well? And the end result of that is that it's a genocide, because all human beings are now gone. They don't measure up. They're not as pretty. They're not as psionically have those capabilities. They're going to feel inferior. And you think that's going to work? No, it's not going to work. Either they're going to bring us up to their level, or we're never going to be with them. But there's never going to be this living side by side. Doesn't work.
Oh, I agree with that. I don't think their intention is to cohabitate in as equal partners of this world. And if by psionic you mean extraordinary powers of psychic ability, yes, they do possess those, and they would prefer to maintain hegemony in those capabilities. And I don't think that they're giving us those capabilities, even if they may let us in on a few tips and tricks, just like technology. They may give a few trinkets from space, but they're not going to give the key knowledge about how to undertake interstellar travel until we're a junior partner in the firm. But by then, we're not the same people we used to be.
Thank you. Othello, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Awesome. Thank you. Reed and Marshall, it's an honor and a privilege to speak to you both. I've been waiting for this moment for many years. I just have a couple questions. I could probably ask you 1,000, but I won't. But my first question is, how are we doing? How are we doing in terms of human opinion about intervention, about its understanding about the extraterrestrial presence, about our spiritual development? Do you see the needle moving in a positive direction, either in your personal communication with the beyond or in what you've observed in people you've spoken to? I guess I'm looking for a status report, because from where I'm sitting, we're at an extreme disadvantage. We're a scrappy group of dedicated, hopeful people who believe that the world is going in a direction that is not in human interest. And I don't know where to look to see signs that we're getting it right or that we're improving things. So just maybe speak to that a little bit.
Marshall, why don't you be the first?
Most people don't know what to do with this or have an opinion about it. They're taken up in the world. Many people are laboring under extreme poverty or political, religious oppression. People in the world just don't want to hear certain things. But that doesn't mean that life isn't moving. And we have a destiny in the universe, and that destiny is going to begin with us having to deal with intervention. So I'm not homeocentric in the sense that I don't think we have a destiny in the universe. And if people can be given opportunity to understand what is going on, many more people are going to come forth, and we've seen that happen. We're late in the game, there's no doubt about that, but this is a long game. It's not going to be over in 5 years. It's not going to be over in 10 years. So we have time, but not a lot of time. And the people who can respond to this responsibly and begin to become pro-human in the face of intervention can play lots of different roles and have a great part in strengthening the human family. But we are going to be facing environmental breakdown. We are going to be facing economic contraction. These are realities that we are facing and will face. So that can bring people closer together, or it can set them against each other. So there's a lot of unknowns in the journey ahead. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm here to do a mission. I'm on a mission. And some of you may feel that way about yourself too, even if that mission is not yet clarified for yourself. And whether things look good or bad in the moment is not going to deter you from the mission. It might give you an opportunity to speak about things or address certain problems that are immediate. But I'm in this for the long game. And I think Reed is in this for the long game. And some of you present here are in this for the long game. I think what's important here is we have to get clear about who is in the world, why they're in the world, what it means, and how we should respond. And if we're still lost in the weeds, or we're still beating around the bush, we're still hoping and praying it's a good thing, we are not responding in a way that's going to empower us or make us able to be of service to other people in a meaningful way. So this is really about human responsibility. And if we lose that ability to respond, which can happen from many different sources, both human and otherwise, no, it's not over yet. You don't drop the ball.
Should I click it again?
The game is just beginning. You don't drop the ball. So here we are, and we have the journey ahead for us. And it's real, and it's big, and it's important.
Well, thank you so much for that, Marshall. Reed, how are you looking right now on time? I'm not sure if Eric's question is for you guys. Eric, is your question for Reed and Marshall?
Yeah, it would. And then if Dr. John wants to come in after, if that's cool.
Can we do one more question, Reed?
Yeah, I can. And let me just piggyback on Marshall there. It's a great question, a fellow, and I would say it's a rough picture. I would say I can't determine the needle moving very much in any direction in the sense of calling this out for what it is or what it probably is. However, I do see some hope on the horizon that if disclosure can increasingly occur, maybe not even solely by government, military contractors, but out in the public, which is, I think, what a lot of people in this space are about. They're about bringing out the human NHI interface. If more of that can come forward, if we can make a few responsible assumptions and shift from possibility to probability, I think where we land is that we are being probably visited by physical aliens. And if that were the case, there are a set of very logical, responsible, and cautious starting points that I would advocate we adopt. Now, if that can increasingly, that dialogue occur and people can, do their walk around of the phenomenon and kind of land on some square, maybe like that. And again, I'm not trying to drive everyone to that outcome, but I do advocate that as a starting assessment. I think there's the possibility that government can corroborate that instead of disclose it. And a little bit more disclosure from the right people about a physical alien visitation, with people beginning to think in logical ways about physical alien visitation, could create a scenario where it's not just a few thousand of us on Twitter, it's 100 million people. And that 100 million human people are thinking like human beings. They're thinking like humans that are being discovered by non-humans. And it's not to say they're excluding all possibilities in the universe, but they're starting in the right place. And I would love to see that. And I think there's hope for that.
Thank you, Reed. I did want to ask you, what do you think is causing this analysis paralysis, for lack of a better term?
Oh, that's a huge one. Well, let's see. I think, a number of kind of early dynamics got set in train that are still underway today. And one of them I could summarize as ET good, government bad. The secrecy that followed Roswell and all the attempts to deny, obfuscate, ridicule have created this dynamic, this assumed dynamic, but it's actually quite deep, that the government is the bad actor. They're the ones keeping us away from, and here comes the opposite side of the coin, the good stuff. And the good stuff it all sits in the ET side of the ring, right? We assume. And it's just not that. It is just so not that. And yet this is a very deeply entrenched thing for folks. I think that's one thing operative. I think this other thing of opening up the aperture to entertain possibilities early in one's inquiry, very important. But the inability to close the aperture and focus, and not having enough people help others through the cognitive process of making sense of this event. And so people just stay in possibility the whole way. And of course, possibility has other advantages that kind of hack our human neurology, like novelty, novel new information, and many other fields suffer from this. Like, for example, the preponderance of health fads, when, it's pretty highly established certain behavioral truths about eating and exercise and sleeping and hydration, but everyone wants the newest, next shiny thing. And so I think that love for the next shiny thing, especially in this shiny UFO space, is another contributor. I think those elements of the defense establishment that have been trying to either collaborate with the alien presence or to resist it on their own terms in the background have done quite a number on the human species. And I think that might be beginning to dawn, just how much damage was caused there by the attempt to kind of manage this behind the curtain. So those are three, but great question. That's a whole space right there.
Yeah, it's the kind of stuff that makes my head want to explode, because I've never come across a group of people who are, nothing can be known. Everything is unknown. It's all, we just can't know it. So it's fascinating to me. I want to make sure a fellow actually gets to everything that he wanted to say before we let Reed and Marshall go. A fellow, were you finished?
I could be finished at any time. The core of my question, that was the urgent need that I felt that I need to ask, and it was a personal question that I was asking more for myself almost than anyone else, so selfishly, thank you for letting me do that. I guess I could ask one follow-up question that maybe is more conducive to group discussion, which has to do with the allies themselves, this sort of mysterious but potentially beneficial group who have been observing us but are bound by high moral standing not to intervene, but for also good reasons as well. Is there a future where they would in some way intervene, and I mean intervene in the most benign sense, like sending a signal to our satellite system, flashing lights at a distance, in a pattern that all of humanity can see that the intervention can't intercept? These types of interventions, are any of those on the table, or are these naive questions that the intervention would easily be able to prevent from happening?
Marshall,
I can address that. Well, remember, the Allies are a group of observers from several different planets whose own worlds had undergone an intervention very similar to our own. And so they were helped by unseen forces during their times and periods of conflict, in some cases which was very extreme. And so they're now bound to provide that service themselves to us, not just only to us, but to some other world or worlds that are undergoing the same kind of intervention experience as their first direct encounter with intelligent life in the universe on a large scale. So I don't think they're in a position to interfere. I don't think they seek to interfere, because then they have to take responsibility for maintaining interference to becoming a cooperative or co-combatant in a situation on Earth where humanity is going to have to speak up for itself. We have the power to ward off intervention because conquest is not allowed here. And if it looks like we are in complete denial or a revolution against that, or significant revolution against that, the intervention now, its plans become much more difficult to achieve, and they would eventually have to withdraw. This is what the Allies say, okay? So we have the power of authority, we're just not using that authority. We don't have the awareness to have that authority. We don't have it spiritually, we don't have it internally, and we don't have it practically regarding the presence of the intervention in the world today. So this is, it begins with education and awareness. And we're in the period of education and awareness. And that's what, we're doing outside the government. We're wasting our time trying to beat that door down. And because,
Marshall.
yes, go
Oh
ahead.
no, no, sorry, Marshall. I wanted to add, but not interrupt.
Oh, it's just that, the Allies of Humanity is a service to humanity. But really, what we need to know is what we can see and know about this based on what's happened already, which paints a very clear picture if you're willing to look at it clearly. You can't turn this into something you want to be good if everything it does really isn't good. And so there has to be some recognition here, or we're just living in confusion, and you can't have preference regarding this. You can't be what you want it to be. The universe does not respond to that. You can't create this reality. It is a reality, and you either respond to it or you don't. And if you don't respond, then that's one less person who is unwilling or unable to respond to a situation that can change the whole world, which we're undergoing right now. So the power is in our hands. No one's going to come and save us. No one is going to come and, drive away the intervention. We have to do that. That's almost like a rite of passage if we're going to become a free and self-determined people in the universe, which would create a world very different than the world we're looking at right now, by the way. And the fourth set of briefings in the Allies talks about what that could look like, not necessarily would look like, but could look like, which would be very, very different than what we see today. So it will take challenge to us to make us rise this occasion. And we have to rise this occasion if we're going to be a free people in the universe going into the future.
Marshall, if I may add a couple things to that, many people don't know, but the Allies' mission that brought the four briefings, per what they say about themselves and through your contacts with them, was actually the second of two missions. The first mission was partially terminated due to the intervention, finding them, identifying them, and actually forcing them to self-terminate. And so when the second mission came after the first set of briefings, pretty much right away, they said that their briefings brought attention upon them from the intervention and forced them to actually flee our solar system. And all their remaining actually, the second book, I believe, was given on the eve of their flight. But this third and fourth book were given outside the solar system for this reason. So it just, this is what the Allies say has happened to them. And that's just maybe a grain of salt to take with the thought of, why don't they just send a signal? Why don't they say what worlds they're from? Why don't they land and do something? It's like, we should really think about how competing or complementary intents would function in the same space. Can a beneficial intent function alongside an aggressive intent in the same space? Or do they go, are they reduced to their lowest common denominator, which is aggression? And if the beneficials are not set up for aggression, if they're not military in nature, and if they don't want to have the spirit of their mission altered, then they cannot necessarily confront the aggressor, lest they become one themselves. And so, for that reason, it sounds like the Allies have retreated from basically any spatial environment around the Earth, including the solar system, or even the very farthest edges of the Kuiper Belt, for example, because they cannot function in their intent alongside an aggressor like this. And I think the story that they tell kind of highlights exactly why they were not able to overtly help or provide a signal that might reveal who they are, where they're from, and or their current position. And then, of course, any signal that they would provide may not necessarily be unifying. It may not necessarily provide evidence that there's a beneficial ally. And so this is, our inability to decode signal is a big problem here. It's like, in the native people's analogy, there's many ships out in the bay and they're all flying different flags. And I think it's a little hazardous to think that we can decode the meaning of those flags and identify friend from foe. And, as a result, a beneficial form of life might have to retreat and to provide an incontrovertible situation where we can say, okay, you know what, any alien presence in the world today needs to first retreat and then engage us properly according to our rules of engagement and the ethics of contact that we human beings articulate. And then from there, we negotiate access to our solar system, to our world. That might be truthfully the only way.
It's the Alex briefings, and I hope that you will all take the opportunity to read them. They're not very long. They're very rich. But before you come to any final assessment on your own, because they're very compassionate. They're saying, here's what you must know, some of which you cannot know, given that you're still stuck on the surface of your world. That will create a clear picture for you. It's not ambiguous. It's not happening at different levels. It's not like it's not a spiritual battle. It's a physiological battle. It's a resource battle. It's life itself on the most fundamental and basic levels. And so we as human beings have a long history of intervention. We have a long history of the difficulty of establishing free societies, which only occur in certain places in the world today. So we can have appreciation for these things. And they also talk about, what restrains them. Even their home planets, they can't even mention their home planets because, as you will read in these briefings, they represent the free nations in our region of space, who by contract are not allowed to interfere with the activities of the larger trade networks in order for their freedom to be secured and not to be intervened with. So it's a very
Marshall,
complex situation, which they actually describe in the course of their briefings, which gives you an idea that they are here without official guidance from their governments. They're doing this as a service to humanity because of the guidance of higher spiritual powers, basically.
Marshall and Reed, I want to end the space gracefully. And Dr. B, thank you for enduring so much. Are all three of you down for a continued space, one where there's way fewer technical issues?
Yeah, perhaps. And I do have to go as well.
Yeah,
But
I know you
I
have to jump out
appreciate
right now.
I appreciate this, and I'm just grateful that you all hung in there. This is really important to everybody, I'm sure, for certain reasons. And we all have been sent into the world for a certain purpose, and this purpose has to do with where we are and where we're going. Beyond our own pursuit of happiness, our own preferential way of seeing things, there's a deeper purpose for us being here, and this may call it out of us as we proceed.
And Marshall and Reed, thank you so much. We'll be in touch with you, and we have so many more questions for Dr. Brandenburg and for both of you. So hopefully we can do a part 2.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
everyone.
Have a great
Appreciate.
afternoon, everyone.
Thank you to the hosts. Appreciate you all.
We'll be in touch for sure.